He woke up in the middle of a forest. There was chaos everywhere. Goblins had invaded and were destroying the crops. Farmers were trying to fight them off with hoes and other melee weapons. Even when they landed solid hits, it barely did any damage. The goblins just kept tearing everything apart. The guy watching all this had just been reincarnated into the very game world where he had died after living as a shut-in gamer. He barely even left his room. Right in front of him, the system asked him to choose a class. The farmers were screaming for help, but Alan just stared at them, thinking they were NPCs. So instead of choosing a class everyone would pick, like a powerful warrior or an overpowered mage, he chose the class everyone considered useless, the crafter. With this broken class, he could use the knowledge from his previous life to craft modern weapons in a medieval world. The very first thing he made was an assault rifle. Alan kicked the door down and walked in like a boss, because in a world where everyone depends on strength, he could have anything he wanted right at his fingertips. Then came the first shot. The villagers were terrified, but Alan stayed completely calm, dropping the goblins one by one. Because in a world where only medieval weapons exist, he could bring in as many modern items as he wanted. Then he started crafting more assault rifles and handing them out to the farmers. He explained how they worked, almost knocking one poor NPC over in the process. But now every single one of them was gunning down goblins. It was an absolute massacre. As his level kept rising, the farmer rewarded him with a ruby and a magic stone you obtain by defeating monsters. Adventurers make a living by selling those stones for money. But then, a giant armored goblin appeared. The farmers ran for their lives, while Alan remained perfectly calm. The farmers fired the first shots, only making the giant goblin even angrier. When the beast leaped straight at the protagonist, Alan calmly looked at his ruby, because he could use it to craft an even stronger weapon. And then this absolute madman crafted a rocket launcher. Yeah, you heard that right. With a single shot, the giant goblin was reduced to ashes before his eyes. The system chat was flooding with level up notifications, and he earned another one of those overpowered magic stones. The farmers couldn't believe it. They asked how he managed to kill a boss in a single shot, and that was the day the world's first crafter was born. This time, he's definitely reaching level 999. Facing a colossal creature with red eyes, Alan stands his ground, holding his materialized weapon. Alan raises the weapon with absolute calm, aiming at the creature in front of him without hesitation. But the enemy was a level 20 rock golem, 7 levels above Alan, staring down at him from above. Alan opens fire, unleashing precise bursts against the enormous stone figure in front of him. Each shot hits the golem's body directly, sending fragments flying in all directions with force. Analyzing the damage dealt, Alan notices that the holes in the golem's body begin to smoke. While observing closely, he notices that the marks from the shots on the golem start to react strangely. In the same instant, the golem's face reconstructs itself, the wounds closing as it stares at Alan with red eyes. Realizing this, Alan turns his face to the side, processing that this thing heals itself. He then materializes a new weapon in his hands, calculating that pure physical attacks aren't enough against this enemy. But he soon decides that the situation is perfect to test another technique, rising with determination. A pulse of energy expands around Alan as he prepares the next move. Holding a modification slot in his hands, Alan locks the component into the weapon with precision. Right after, the modified weapon appears in his hands, transformed into a long rifle and reconfigured by the slot. Fixing his blue-gray gaze ahead, Alan concludes that loading magic stones will amplify that weapon's power. Observing the slot attached to the weapon, Alan concludes that loading magic stones will further amplify its power. He then extends his hand and accesses his inventory, materializing an item compartment in front of him. A golem magic stone appears in Alan's palm, glowing with intensity. Identifying the stone he collected along the way, Alan locks it directly into the modified weapon's slot. In the same instant, the coupled stone reacts with force, releasing a discharge that runs through the entire weapon. As this happens, Alan fixes his blue-gray gaze ahead, ready to see the test's result. The golem is hit by a discharge that paralyzes it momentarily, its body locked in place. Alan holds the modified weapon with both hands, analyzing the new attributes it gained from the stone. Satisfied with the result, Alan realizes the stone added a piercing effect to the weapon, ignoring physical defense. But before he advances, the golem launches forward with everything, charging against Alan at speed. Without hesitation, Alan brings the weapon to his face and aims with surgical precision, locking the target. Alan then opens fire from his knees as the golem advances, each shot hitting the creature's body. The shots pierce the golem's body repeatedly, sending pieces flying in all directions. Raising his blue-gray gaze, Alan follows the destruction caused as the projectiles continue hitting the target. Even with its body breaking apart little by little, the golem still moves, groaning as it tries to resist the shots. The golem's body then explodes into pieces, rock fragments flying in all directions with brutal force. As the dust settles, Alan stands before the rubble, rising from level 13 to 14. He observes the magic stone shatter in the weapon, noticing that only it broke, not the rifle. Alan then crouches calmly, holding the weapon to the side as he collects something small from the ground. Picking up the dropped item, Alan rises one more level, reaching 15, without showing any reaction. Changing scenes, Alan receives a notification about Shulan villagers repelling orcs with the weapons he crafted. Alan travels through villages distributing weapons to common residents, accumulating experience without needing to fight directly. Walking along a dirt path, Alan moves forward knowing that protecting the villages increases his level. Shifting to the Adventurers Guild HQ, a large castle rises imposingly under the open sky. Inside the HQ, two adventurers talk in front of a crystal orb, commenting about a level rising way too fast. One of them approaches a magic mirror, completely astonished by the numbers appearing on the surface. The two then face the data, discussing whether it's possible to go from level 4 to 15 in just 4 days. Reading the name registered in the mirror, they identify the mysterious adventurer as Alan, having never heard of him before. A third person points at the mirror indignantly, shouting that this adventurer's class is Crafter, a class considered useless. Holding the magic mirror, one of the guild members decides to project the record of Alan's last battle for the group. The recording is displayed in the crystal orb, showing Alan completely dominating a rock golem with direct shots. Everyone in the room then stares at the strange weapon in Alan's hands, unable to identify what it was. Seeing Alan take down a creature with absolute defense so easily, the members are left speechless, unable to believe what they saw. As they watch, the recording shows the golem shattering under the shots, with total destruction in just seconds. Alan appears standing alone among the rubble, and the members conclude that his power equals that of a level 50. One of them comments that crafted weapons should be weaker, looking to the side with a serious expression. But none of them understand how that works, admitting among themselves that Alan is clearly on a completely different level. Realizing the gravity of the situation, a man with glasses backs away slightly, suggesting they report everything to the master. The crystal orb then pulses again, revealing that Alan just started another battle against a boss. Shifting to the open field, Alan faces a level 27 Sandworm, a boss-class creature emerging from the sand. The creature opens its mouth full of teeth pointed directly at Alan, advancing in his direction. But Alan keeps his blue-gray gaze fixed on the enemy, calculating that the Sandworm has little defense but absurd HP. He then dodges an explosion on the ground, concluding he needs to test the power limit of smaller weapons. Alan holds the rock golem's magic stone in his palm, ready to use the material collected earlier. Extending his hands, Alan activates the craft skill, materializing a new weapon from scratch with concentrated energy. A pistol appears in his hands with a base attack of 1220 and a 55% bonus applied automatically. Examining the newly crafted weapon, Alan concludes that fusing the magic stone gave absurd attributes to the item. He then fits another magic stone into the pistol slot, stacking modifications on top of the ones already there. In the same instant, the stone reacts to the fitting, releasing a discharge that runs through the entire weapon structure. Alan raises the modified pistol with both hands, now classified as an ice pistol with 1891 attack. Seeing the result, he confirms it came out exactly as planned, calculating that freezing the target guarantees total control. The Sandworm then emerges from the ground at speed, its huge body rising right in front of Alan. But Alan advances head-on without hesitation, aiming with the modified pistol as the worm's body passes by him. The shot hits the worm's body directly, piercing the creature's structure with absolute precision. The projectile then expands through the worm's body, freezing the creature's flesh from the inside out rapidly. Seeing the effect spreading, the worm's mouth begins to lock up, being taken over by ice little by little. Meanwhile, Alan keeps his blue-gray eyes fixed on the target, following the freezing expand through the creature. The entire Sandworm is now raised and frozen before Alan, completely immobilized in the same place. But then cracks begin to open through the worm's frozen body, and the structure begins to give way from within. Leaning against the worm's frozen body, Alan holds the pistol calmly as the creature cracks completely. The Sandworm Sandworm explodes into ice pieces, destroyed with a single shot from a simple modified pistol. Alan then stands among the scattered fragments, concluding to himself that Crafter is an absurdly powerful class. Finishing the combat, he spins the remaining magic stone between his fingers, deciding the next step. Changing scenes, Alan walks toward the city on the horizon, ready to convert the magic stones into money. Arriving at the Adventurers Guild branch, Alan approaches the counter and asks to exchange the stones he collected. The attendant opens her arms in shock before the enormous pile of magic stones stacked on the counter in front of her. Without any expression, Alan responds with a single word when she asks his name, saying only Alan. Hearing the name, the attendant freezes for an instant, her face completely changing expression. She then asks him to wait a moment, gesturing hurriedly as she backs away from the counter urgently. Alan slightly furrows his brow with a question mark, not understanding the reason for her reaction. Meanwhile, heavy footsteps approach quickly from outside the guild, advancing toward the counter where Alan is. Noticing the movement, Alan turns his face coldly, questioning what's happening around him. Several armed soldiers then enter the room and completely surround Alan, standing around the pile of stones. A knight at the front of the group confirms Alan's name and declares he's under investigation for suspicion. Not understanding anything that's happening, Alan stares at the soldiers with a cold gaze and questions the accusation. Magic chains are thrown around Alan, binding his entire body before he can react. The knight then announces that Alan will be forcibly escorted to the guild headquarters immediately. Hearing this, Alan fixes his blue-gray gaze ahead, his face closed and completely impassive before the situation. Shackled and escorted, Alan is brought to the meeting room at the Adventurers Guild headquarters. Then someone orders the guards to release him, and Alan breaks the chains with ease, staring down everyone present. One of the men at the head of the table leans forward, admitting that Alan's absurd level growth caught their attention. Adjusting his glasses and interlacing his fingers, the meeting leader makes it clear they really needed to talk with him. Alan stretches his fingers calmly, responding in an ironic tone that this was a hell of a way to receive someone. Rising abruptly from his chair, the man with glasses demands to know every detail about the weapon Alan uses. While hearing the question, Alan responds coldly that even if he explained, hardly anyone there would understand. From a corner of the room, another guild member lets out a mocking comment, calling Alan a simple craftsman with no expression. Provoked, Alan stands still in the center of the room, staring at the source of the provocation without showing any reaction. But in an instant, a slight smile appears at the corner of Alan's face as he realizes exactly what they're trying to do. Raising his arm, Alan activates his creation ability right there in front of everyone, materializing something from nothing. Seeing the object take form in the air, one of the guild members steps back with eyes wide in shock. Landing on the table, the materialized weapon displays its complete statistics, revealing 50 attack and 30 rounds per magazine. Leaning over the table, the guild members read the attributes and are left completely speechless by what they see. Turning his back on the still shocked group, Alan walks toward the exit asking if they're done yet. Turning his face slightly, Alan declares that his goal is to be the first in the world to reach level 99. At that, the meeting leader rises abruptly, asking him to wait before leaving. Then, with his glasses reflecting an intense light, he questions whether defeating the Demon King is Alan's final objective. Casting a sideways glance, Alan confirms that's more or less it, reminding them that the guild also benefits from all this. Facing the room with a serious expression, the leader admits that humanity is facing an unprecedented crisis because of the enemy army. Shifting to an external scene, rubble and destruction overtake what remains of a great city recently devastated by the army. Returning to the room, Alan responds calmly that he'll solve that kind of problem too, at the right time, and asks them to schedule a meeting next time. But before he leaves, one of the guild members stretches out his hand and yells for him to wait, saying there's one more thing. Stopping with a sideways look, Alan asks coldly what else they want from him now. Raising his index finger with a smile, the leader suggests that if Alan wants to level up fast, joining a clan would be the right path. Hearing this, Alan repeats the word with a confused expression, not quite understanding what it's about. Smiling, the man explains that clans are organizations formed by adventurers and offers to introduce Alan to an A-rank clan. At that, another member jumps from his chair protesting loudly, saying nobody asked him to cut in line. Pushing the other aside, he argues that the introduction should be made by the clan he himself favors, an elite group with excellent connections. While the members argue among themselves, each suggesting a different clan, Alan raises his hand and interrupts the whole mess. Waving his hand indifferently, Alan makes it clear he doesn't intend to join any clan now, as he wants freedom to move however he wants. At that, the two leaders exchange a tense look and say only that if he changes his mind, Just let them know. Turning his back for good, Alan thanks them with a single word and pushes the door to leave without looking back. Alone in the room, the two stand there commenting that he vanished and that he's impossible to figure out. Then one of the members leans over the weapon left on the table, asking how that thing works, understanding nothing. Staring at the weapon with a serious expression, the leader orders them to summon the kingdom's best craftsmen and blacksmiths to analyze every detail of it. Changing scenes, a huge crowd gathers in front of the entrance to a dungeon carved into the rock. Arriving at the wolf mine dungeon area, two adventurers observe the busy entrance beside a child. Walking through the crowd with a calm expression, Alan notes that even in this world, dungeon entrances get packed with people. As he advances, an excited adventurer runs toward Alan shouting, asking if he wants to join their group. But upon seeing the level 15 indicator appear above Alan, the adventurer freezes in place, completely shocked by the number. Backing away quickly, he asks Alan to forget what he said and runs off without even looking back. Still hearing the guy grumble that level 15 has no business in a level 25 dungeon, Alan just lets out a smile. Then, with his gaze fixed ahead, Alan ponders that he'd never come to such a weak place if it weren't for the level difference bonus. At that, an explanation screen appears showing that this world has an experience bonus based on the level difference between the adventurer and the enemy. Hearing a scream from far away, Alan turns his face quickly, with a cold and attentive look. Then a group of 4 adventurers appears holding a girl by the arms, trying to convince her of something. While one of them laughs with his tongue out, the names Lucas level 65 and Emma level 20 flash on screen. Around them, people in the crowd whisper among themselves, saying that Lucas usually does horrible things with girls inside the dungeon. Then someone adds that he knocks anyone out with one hit, and that nobody there has the guts to confront him. Desperate, Emma screams for them to stop, saying she just wants to join a group compatible with her level, without depending on anyone. But Lucas spreads his arms with a twisted smile, ignoring everything and insisting she just needs to go with the flow and level up fast. Behind him, his cronies approach with threatening expressions, making it clear the intention is anything but innocent. Then something starts to take form right in front of Lucas's group, and one of them backs away, shouting in confusion. In the same instant, a metal structure emerges from the ground with force, hitting Lucas directly and throwing him down. With bulging eyes and his face on the ground, Lucas tries to understand what just happened. Completely stunned. His cronies back away in panic, shouting his name and trying to figure out what that metal structure that appeared from nowhere was. Walking toward Emma calmly, Alan murmurs a quick apology, admitting it's still hard to control. Stopping beside her with an impassive expression, Alan says only that his creation fired accidentally. Crushed on the ground, trembling, Lucas grinds his teeth and repeats the word angrily, still trying to process what happened to him. Rising from the ground with a clenched fist, Lucas advances toward Alan, shouting that he'll kill him for this. But Alan doesn't even flinch, explaining calmly that he was testing creating something at a distance, and that Lucas simply was in the wrong place. Freezing with rage, Lucas growls through his teeth, clearly at the limit of control. Then he draws his sword and advances, yelling that Alan will pay for pretending it was an accident. Noticing the level 15 indicator, Lucas stops and points, completely incredulous at the number appearing above Alan. At that, his cronies behind him burst into laughter, saying a level 15 doesn't stand the slightest chance against them. Staring at Alan with disdain, Lucas decides to spare him so as not to ruin his own reputation in front of the crowd. But Alan just waves his hand and starts walking away, with Emma running behind trying to keep pace. Walking beside Alan, Emma thanks him sincerely, saying that without him, things would have gotten much worse there. At that, Lucas shouts behind them that the conversation isn't over yet, demanding they stop immediately. With a twisted smile, he makes it clear he said he wouldn't kill, but never said he'd let it slide. Without even turning his whole body, Alan casts a sideways look and asks coldly what Lucas wants now. Positioning his sword in front of the dungeon entrance, Lucas proposes a contest between the two right there. Opening a wide smile, he launches the challenge of who finishes the dungeon first in a speed duel. Staring at Lucas with a cold and calculating look, Alan hears the condition that if he loses, Lucas will wipe that confident look off his face once and for all. Hearing the conditions, Emma protests in front of Alan, pointing out that the level difference makes everything completely unfair. At that, Lucas opens a twisted smile and suggests taking Emma as a prize if Alan doesn't accept the original conditions. Trembling with wide eyes, Emma backs away, hearing that, clearly terrified by Lucas's proposal. Without hesitating a second, Alan responds that he's in, leaving Emma shocked beside him. But before revealing what he wants in return, Alan stops and simply says he doesn't need anything if he wins. Grinding his teeth with an arrogant smile, Lucas fires back that Alan's chances of winning are practically zero anyway. Then Alan runs his hand through his disheveled hair and gets Lucas's attention with a simple "hey." Staring at his rival with a cold and calculating look, Alan says calmly that defeating someone so weak wouldn't be worth anything anyway. In front of the wolf mine dungeon entrance, smaller creatures circle around the dark, sealed portal. Emma raises her staff with a surprised expression, warning Alan about the recommended level of 25 for the dungeon. But Alan turns to the side with that cold look and replies that it's fine, since he already planned to hunt there anyway. Then he walks straight toward the portal while Emma follows him, and Lucas watches them from a distance with a mocking air. Turning to the group, Lucas smiles arrogantly and suggests that Alan find other weak players to join him. Alan responds in the same tone, poking that even a level 65 player like Lucas needs a crowd to enter a dungeon. Furious at the provocation, Lucas opens his mouth in anger, ready to react to Alan's comment. Turning his back to him, Alan just waves his hand and says everyone does what they want, since that's Lucas's problem. Running after him, Emma gestures desperately and shouts, asking Alan to wait because she wants to go too. Standing on the ground, Alan receives a group invite notification hovering in front of him. Then he stares fixedly at the notification with that cold blue-gray gaze, saying nothing for a moment. Without hesitation, Alan moves his finger and presses decline on Emma's invite, a level 20 priestess, while she shouts indignantly from afar. Desperate, Emma runs full speed and grabs Alan's legs, asking him to let her go with him, throwing herself on the ground. Stopping in place with a neutral expression, Alan hears Emma say she feels partially responsible for what happened and can't let him go alone. Floating right in front of Alan's face, Emma's invite as a level 20 priestess awaits his final decision between accept or decline. Staring at the notification with that cold blue-gray gaze, Alan recognizes that Emma is more stubborn than he expected. She stands firm, holding her staff, and Alan gives in, saying he'll take her along. Then he presses the accept button on Emma's invite, a level 20 priestess, confirming her entry into the group. Radiant, Emma smiles with her eyes closed and thanks him excitedly, holding her staff with both hands. Entering the dungeon with Emma beside him, Alan hears Lucas shouting from afar not to let her die in there, but Lucas grins crookedly with his companions, making it clear they plan to have fun with Emma later. Without reacting to the threat, Alan walks in silence, while Emma beside him notices something disturbing in Lucas's words. Arriving at a stone door inside the dungeon, Alan extends his hand and pushes the entrance while Emma accompanies him. Upon opening, Alan reads on the panel that the absolute dungeon clear record is 19 minutes and 12 seconds. Staring at the scoreboard with a calculating expression, Alan murmurs that at his current level he can beat that time easily. Turning to the portal with determination, Alan says all right and tells Emma to move forward with him. Entering the wolf mine dungeon, their silhouettes emerge in the portal, while monsters and other groups fill the corridor ahead. Various types of creatures dominate the environment, including level 20 bats, level 22 caterpillars, and level 21 undead warriors. Stopping upon seeing the amount of enemies, Emma comments frightened that there are many, and doubts they can even get past that room. But Alan turns his face with that cold look and replies that it's fine, since they're just a bunch of weak enemies. Turning to Emma inside the dungeon, Alan tells her to put the staff in her inventory because it's getting in the way. Staring at her with a serious expression, Alan makes it clear that if she joined his group, she'll fight alongside him like any member. Alan activates the craft skill with his hands and begins to materialize something while Emma watches open-mouthed behind him. 2 machine guns appear beside Emma, and she shouts in astonishment at the absurd attack power of that weapon. Holding both weapons with a firm posture, Alan explains that he's the only one capable of crafting that type of armament, and that using it is simple. Shifting focus to the enemies, undead and creatures advance through the dark corridor toward them. Then Alan raises the weapon with that blue-gray gaze locked on the targets and coldly orders that you just pull the trigger. Firing in sequence, Alan takes down bats, caterpillars, and undead warriors scattered across the dungeon floor with precise shots. Impressed with the result, Emma holds both machine guns while Alan tells her to stop standing around and get into the fight. Without hesitation, Emma fires the weapons and hits the enemies around her, being thrown backward by the violent recoil of the shots. Trembling all over and screaming Alan's name, Emma struggles to hold both weapons that shake out of control in her hands. Alan explains calmly that he increased the recoil on purpose, since in a place full of enemies, she'll hit something even shooting randomly. Cutting the conversation short, Alan rushes forward carrying both weapons and declares they're going straight to the dungeon boss. Switching to Lucas's group's corridor, He strikes with his broadsword against the enemies around him while advancing with the group. Finishing the area, Lucas plants his sword in the ground, and one of the companions beside him comments that he's really impressive. The companion with the cap faces Lucas head-on and says he doesn't need to pretend he doesn't know about the extra boss that appears on the first clear. Smiling sideways with that mocking expression, Lucas admits he's been caught and that he knew about it all along. Lucas's group advances through the corridor, while he comments that newbie will waste a lot of time in there. Walking ahead of the group with his arms open, Lucas states that even if Alan reaches the boss by luck, he'll die there. Staring at the corridor with a crooked smile, Lucas admits that Alan humiliated him and that he'll make sure he pays dearly for it. Arriving at the deepest part of the dungeon, Alan and Emma stop before a large sealed door pulsing with energy. Surprised, Emma comments that it's barely been 10 minutes since they entered, and Alan responds indifferently while the timer shows 8 minutes. Sitting on the ground with both weapons in her arms, Emma appears completely exhausted after the rush through the dungeon. Still on the ground with the weapons, Emma complains that it's her first time there and asks Alan to be patient while he rolls his eyes. Standing up furiously with the weapons in her hands, Emma barks that it's her first time and to stop demanding, while Alan murmurs resignedly. Upon checking his status, Alan sees he's at level 18 with attack 36 and defense 36, having gone up 3 levels in this dungeon alone. Meanwhile, Emma goes from level 20 to 21, smiling calmly, and Alan notes she gained little because of the level difference between them. Agitated with the weapons in her hands, Emma shouts for Alan to stop daydreaming or they'll lose the time attack and tells him to hurry up. Without arguing, Alan walks to the large door with Emma beside him and says they'll finish this quickly while the doors tremble ahead. Upon pushing the entrance, an explosion of force hits them both, and Emma groans in pain while Alan holds her firmly outside. With wide eyes and an expression of shock, Emma realizes something alarming as soon as the door opens in front of them. An explosion of force sweeps through the entire boss room, while the 2 silhouettes of Alan and Emma are pushed by the impact. Emerging in the center of the room, the level 25 Queen Werewolf faces them with a predatory gaze and dominant posture. Right beside her, a second boss reveals itself, the level 25 King Werewolf, and Emma screams frightened upon realizing there are 2. Then Alan comments calmly that there is indeed an exclusive boss for the first clear, while Emma explodes in irritation that he didn't warn her before. The 2 werewolves lunge at each other at absurd speed, colliding in the center of the room with brutal impact. Lying on the ground with both weapons in his hands, Alan holds the machine guns while Emma beside him shouts that the bosses are coming. Staring at the situation with a calculating expression, Alan analyzes that werewolves have speed and evasion too high to hit with direct shots. Quickly, Alan orders Emma to use suppressing fire to buy time while he thinks of a strategy, and she responds that she'll do it. Firing everything, Emma unleashes a barrage that forces both werewolves to dodge while the fire covers the corridor ahead. Even under fire pressure, the Queen and King Werewolf advance separately through the corridor, dodging each shot with extreme speed. Shouting in the middle of combat, Emma admits she can't hit either of the werewolves with her shots. Observing everything with a cold gaze, Alan notes that the 2 separated and concludes this complicates the plan considerably. Advancing with determination, Alan tells Emma to handle the Queen while he faces the King, but she shouts it's impossible to hit them. Taking a direct hit from the Queen Werewolf that grazes her, she faces the creature up close with gritted teeth. With a desperate expression, Emma realizes that both werewolves dodge absolutely everything and begins to give in under pressure. The Queen Werewolf charges toward Alan at absurd speed, while Emma shoots desperately through the corridor. Hearing Emma's scream echo through the room, Alan keeps his face impassive and doesn't take his gaze off the bosses. In an instant, the Queen Werewolf raises her claw and delivers a direct blow against Emma from behind with full force. Confirming what he already suspected, Alan activates craft immediately with a calculating expression and lets the skill take form in his hands. Alan raises his clenched fists and coldly orders them to hold the rival in place. In a second, steel jaws emerge from the ground and bite into the creature, spreading blood. Bleeding and in shock, the enemy is dominated by Alan's craft along with the captured monster below. Emma watches everything open-mouthed, unable to believe that brutal charge simply stopped. Without changing his expression, Alan reminds her he warned from the beginning he would buy time. Seen from above, the 2 enemies are down and immobilized on the ground by the craft. Then Alan reveals he tested using craft at a distance even before the fight began. Walking toward the fallen opponent, he approaches with slow and calculated steps. Materializing the craft in his hands, Alan coldly concludes that a trapped werewolf poses no threat at all. Cornered on the ground with claws scraping the floor, the werewolf snarls without being able to move. Face to face in the silence of the battlefield, battlefield, Alan stares at the defeated monster and extends his hand. With a cold expression, Alan points the weapon directly at the enemy and dismisses the fight with a simple bye. At that, he releases a crystal that destroys the remains of the opponent, ending everything right there. Then Alan slightly turns his face, sensing someone approaching from behind. Running in his direction, Emma cheerfully announces she took down the queen too, completing the mission. Soon after, a message appears confirming the two broke the absolute record of the Wolf Mine dungeon. Without hesitation, Alan guides Emma to exit through the passage that appears ahead of them. Exiting through the dungeon door, dozens of survivors thank them in relief, while Alan coldly concludes the mission. Walking back, Emma holds the weapon and asks about it, while Alan responds without even looking. Upon leaving, a group of adventurers outside recognizes Alan as the guy who faced Lucas. While Alan keeps walking with his back to the group, one of them laughs, thinking he simply gave up and ran. Stopping in place, Alan turns slightly and coldly asks what they're talking about, since they cleared the dungeon. Not believing it, the two laugh and ask him to stop with such absurd lies. Then Alan points to the record crystal and tells them to check it, stating their names are there. At that, the two become serious, and the long-haired one comments this joke went way too far. Even so, the other explains to them that Alan didn't even reach the minimum recommended level and was still a trap crafter. Arriving at the record crystal, the adventurer extends his hand with a smile, certain that nothing will appear. At that, his expression freezes completely upon seeing what's recorded there. Unable to believe it, he reads in shock the record of 9 minutes and 48 seconds with Alan and Emma's names. Then the two stand paralyzed before the crowd, unable to understand what happened. While they try to process the situation, Alan approaches and warns he'll reveal the secret. Materializing 3 weapons through craft around the group, he leaves everyone in absolute shock. Picking up one of the weapons in his hands, the long-haired adventurer examines the object in total amazement. Soon after, the submachine gun specifications appear, showing extremely high attack and instant automatic reload. Excited, Emma holds the weapon and cheerfully explains you just aim at the enemy and do one thing. Then she pulls the trigger, and the weapon fires with brutal force in all directions. Without control, Emma is thrown back by the shots while the adventurers around desperately dodge. Jaw dropped at everything he saw, the short adventurer finally asks what the hell Alan really is. At that, a strong brightness appears out of nowhere right in front of the group, catching everyone's attention. Pushing each other to see better, the crowd of adventurers runs toward the phenomenon. Moving away from the confusion calmly, Alan leaves the group behind and continues on his way alone. Walking with his back to the crowd, Alan leaves while a group of adventurers watches him in silence. At that, a warrior with silver hair tied in a ponytail stands out among the crowd, looking in his direction. Staring at the spot where Alan was, she remains motionless and in absolute silence, saying nothing. Scene change. A few dozen minutes later, Lucas exits the dungeon with his companions, relieved with the result. Confident, he comments he almost cleared it in less than 50 minutes and states victory and the time attack is already guaranteed. Then Lucas sits with his group and coldly declares they'll wait for that cocky newbie to show up. At that, the adventurer in the red hat approaches and calls Lucas by name, bringing news. Facing the other calmly, he warns that the opponent had already left even before Lucas came out. Satisfied, Lucas smiles sideways and immediately concludes he simply ran away in fear. Laughing along, the entire group mocks, stating all that talk was just bluff, and that Alan got the better of Lucas. But the short-haired adventurer corrects everyone seriously, saying Alan didn't run away at all. Lucas furrowed his brow without understanding, refusing to accept that 2 strangers completed the dungeon faster than him. Without backing down, the other confirms it wasn't just faster than Lucas, but faster than anyone in the world. Clenching his jaw, Lucas absorbs the information with a closed and clearly shaken expression. Cursing under his breath, he turns his back to the group and walks furiously toward the dungeon entrance. Gripping the wall with force, Lucas hits the record crystal, refusing to believe what he's about to see. Leaning on the crystal, he reads the data in shock as the mark of 9 minutes and 48 seconds appears. Processing the number, Lucas murmurs confused that his group took almost a full hour in that same dungeon. Completely shaken, he stops in place with sweat running down his face and repeats, "It's a lie. It's impossible." At that, Lucas collapses to the ground, shouting that someone like him could never be surpassed this way. Scene change. In a silent library, a figure seated with their back remains motionless before a huge window. Alone in the room, this figure observes something in their hands with total attention and without moving. Then they hold a report with a photo of Alan and the submachine gun. concluding he's the real thing. At that, someone knocks on the door and the figure seated in the shadows authorizes entry with just one word. Soon after, the door opens slowly, letting a thread of light into the dark environment. Entering through the door, two hooded individuals approach and announce they heard there's a job for them. Without turning, the figure coldly confirms that's right, and there's a specific mission. Sliding a dossier across the table, they point with a finger and state everything revolves around one man. Seeing the information, one of the hooded figures with blue hair examines the face with narrowed eyes and comments it seems quite a challenge. Throwing a heavy bag on the table, the figure coldly guarantees they'll pay very well for the service. Pressing their finger on Alan's photo, the figure orders them to bring him to them. Then, the hooded assassin raises their face in the shadows and concludes the mission with a single word: dead. Worried about possible retaliation from Lucas, Emma says goodbye to Alan at the castle entrance. Alan turns to her and says she doesn't need to run, that he can keep Lucas away if necessary. But Emma steps back, holding the brooch at her neck, and declares that she's also an adventurer and can't depend on him for everything. Alan closes his eyes for a moment, accepting her argument without contest. Then Emma skips away across the barren terrain, asking him to never break her record at the wolf mine. Turning around with her arms spread and a wide smile, she shouts that if they meet again, she wants to form a party with him. And so, Emma officially leaves the party, ending their partnership. A few days later, Alan arrives alone at an isolated location to test his creation ability. Concentrating everything into his hands, he activates craft, making the surrounding field react with full force. Seeing the result appear before him, Alan notes that the exterior came out perfect. Then he climbs onto the created structure to check the armored vehicle's controls. Installed inside, he analyzes the internal mechanisms and confirms that everything was reproduced correctly. With a calculating look and firm voice, Alan orders the tank to advance, but the machine stays still on the desert terrain, with no reaction to the command. Realizing the problem, Alan concludes that without fuel there's no movement, but that craft can create anything as long as he understands its structure. But there are exceptions, since non-solid materials like water, electricity, and gasoline can't be created by craft. Alan notes that he already expected this limitation, and that he already has an alternative solution in mind. Then he extends his hand inside the tank and activates craft directly on the machine's internal mechanism. Holding a magic stone, Alan realizes that in this world they function as a universal energy source. Pressing his finger against the stone, he begins connecting it directly to the vehicle's system. In the same instant, Alan concludes that everything created by craft can also function with magic stones as fuel. Then the tank begins to react, with the entire hull vibrating across the terrain. Accelerating through the open field, the machine advances with full force under Alan's control. Satisfied with the result, he confirms out loud that it worked. But soon, the tank stops completely in the middle of the desert terrain, with no further reaction. The magic stone explodes into fragments inside the compartment, completely destroyed. Inside the vehicle, Alan realizes with a tense expression that he drained all the magical energy in a single instant. Then he climbs onto the structure and concludes that his current level still isn't enough to operate a tank. Returning to the exterior and looking at the machine, Alan recognizes that he'll need higher quality magic stones, but confirms that the stone as an energy source was validated. Determined, Alan activates craft again in his hands and decides to create something on a smaller scale. Using craft, Alan materializes a voice-activated reconnaissance drone in his hands. He presses the magic stone into the drone's compartment to activate it. Watching the device rise, Alan lifts his face and questions how long this smaller version will last. Then he orders the drone to gain altitude and record everything around the area. Satisfied with the performance, Alan notes that the consumption stayed within an acceptable level. While watching the drone fly, he realizes that by replacing the camera with a weapon, he could use it in combat too. Soon after, he materializes a screen in his hands to access the images captured by the device. Holding the drone back with one hand and the screen with the other, Alan assesses that the quality exceeded expectations. But something in the image catches his attention, and he orders the feed to freeze immediately. Analyzing the paused frame, Alan identifies 3 hooded figures in the surroundings and questions who these people are. Noticing the intensity of their gaze, he rules out that they're allies of the mine rivals, concluding that the intent is too heavy for that. Without hesitation, Alan materializes weapons in his hands and takes off running toward the Watchers to confront them directly. On the other side, the hooded figures realize the target is moving in their direction and wonder if they've been discovered. Crouched among the stones, one of the assassins dismisses that possibility, remembering their level 65 assassins with stealth ability always active. But before they finish their reasoning, Alan appears above them and calls out the 5 hiding behind the rocks. Startled, The hooded group realizes they were located even with stealth ability active. One of the members turns to the leader and asks what to do, and he decides to attack since they've been discovered. But one of the assassins hesitates, remembering that Alan's weapon is too fast for any of them to overcome. Hearing this, the leader dismisses the concern, stating that weapon can't cause damage to humans. Then she concludes the target is easy, adding that he's still in the level 20s, and calls the subordinate an idiot for underestimating the situation the other way around. With a tense face, the leader reminds the group that he's in the level 20s, and even so was placed on the elimination list, ordering them to stay alert. Meanwhile, Alan turns his back to the rocky terrain and says he never liked hide-and-seek, asking them to come out. Leaning against a stone, the leader murmurs they have no choice, admitting that cowardice is part of their nature. Then the 5 assassins emerge from the rocks and position themselves in formation before Alan. Facing the group with a cold gaze, Alan asks directly what their objective is. Advancing a step, the leader responds that he shouldn't look at her like that, and that they're there for only one reason. Without hesitation, she launches a swift strike against Alan, declaring they came to take him down. But reacting, Alan realizes the 5 disappeared in an instant. Surrounded by concealment mists, Alan recognizes there are 5 with stealth abilities, and they're not amateurs. Keeping his weapon firm in his hands, Alan concludes it was a good choice to opt for a model made for suppressive fire over a wide area. Emerging from the mist, the leader calls Alan a fool and states that weapon isn't capable of causing even a scratch. But in the same instant, a shot grazes directly across her face, leaving a cut on her face and drawing a shocked reaction. Alan fires the submachine gun at close range, with shots tearing through the air around them. 2 of the assassins take the hits and are violently knocked to the ground, out of combat. With blood on his face and a fixed gaze, Alan holds his position without backing up an inch. Then 2 other group members take simultaneous hits and fall at the same instant, leaving the field open. Seeing 4 of hers fallen scattered across the terrain, Alan advances toward the leader and says she'd need a much better plan to face him. Reloading the weapon calmly, Alan adds that anyone challenging someone with a submachine gun needs to have a much more solid strategy. Staggering and backing up, the leader asks how that weapon managed to cause damage, since it shouldn't work against humans. Then Alan explains from the side that he normally places a restriction on the weapon to avoid damage to allies, zeroing out accidental impact. But he adds that the entire group seemed extremely suspicious and points at something on the weapon while speaking. Hit in the legs, the leader stops in place with wounds bleeding, completely shocked by the result. With a cold gaze, Alan explains that specific projectile was fired without the restriction active, and that breaking that limitation means lethal consequences. Falling to her knees on the terrain, the leader curses while Alan remains standing at a distance, completely dominating the situation. With the gun barrel pointed straight at her face, Alan presses the weapon against the leader's head without saying a word. With the weapon aimed, Alan demands to know why he's being targeted and warns her to speak now or die. Without averting her gaze, the leader admits they're assassins, and they kill whoever they're contracted to eliminate. Then Alan asks who hired them, positioned standing above her and stating he can't think of anyone who'd have reason to want his head. Turning his face slightly, Alan comments that maybe he really hasn't done anything wrong to anyone. But the leader smiles and says the problem isn't what he did, but rather the fact that he's too strong, and that there's a major player who doesn't like that. Keeping her gaze fixed to the side, she adds, "That's all there is to it," without revealing any more names. She spits something between her teeth, with a tiny object coming out of her mouth in a quick movement. With the weapon still over her head, Alan presses harder and demands to know who this major player is. But the leader backs down, saying she's a professional and can't reveal anything more beyond that. Fallen on the ground with Alan standing above looking from afar, she murmurs that she used poison to neutralize herself before being interrogated further. Walking across the terrain with craft active in his hand, Alan reflects that even so, he's still only level 24, unable to imagine who would fear someone at such a low level. Hearing a voice from outside the confrontation commenting that taking down an entire team of experienced assassins is impressive, Alan turns to the side. Facing the direction of the voice with suspicion, Alan questions who that person is, and if she's an ally of the fallen assassins. But the newcomer laughs at the idea, dismissing any connection to that group. Crossing her arms and facing Alan directly, she declares that on the contrary, she's on his side. Without showing any immediate reaction, Alan observes her in silence with a calculating gaze. Standing on a cliff, Alan hears a blue-haired woman propose a partnership, saying it would be advantageous for him. Turning his back, he refuses immediately, making it clear he's never needed any companion. Flashing back, Alan was in a narrow corridor saving Emma, who got trapped between blades, that being the only exception he admitted. At that, the blue-haired woman huffs in irritation, telling him to relax and stop being so closed off. But then she changes her tone, pointing to an assassin's corpse on the ground and saying she knows who hired those people. Hearing this, Alan turns his face slightly with a sharp look, wanting to know who these people were. Facing him head-on, she confirms she knows who Alan is, the record holder of Wolf Mine, and asks if she got it right. Then he raises a finger pointing to his own status and says she can check without needing to ask. She explains his status is hidden in the settings, so Alan adjusts a panel and admits he changed that to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. At that, a notification appears explaining any adventurer can adjust their status display in the system settings. Readjusting the panel, she asks if it's showing now, and Alan confirms yes. Staring at the panel with wide eyes, she reads level 24 out loud, completely stunned by the number. Explaining the previous scene, she says from afar she could never see his level properly, but never expected it to be lower than hers. Satisfied with the exchange, she crosses her arms and says she showed her information, so now it's Alan's turn. Revealing the final panel, it shows her name is Melissa, level 50, sorceress class, and she stares at Alan awaiting his reaction. With a cold, direct look, Alan asks Melissa who sent the assassins after him. Turning her face slightly, she admits she'd love to tell, but won't give up that information for free. Narrowing his eyes, Alan understands immediately she wants something in return. Facing him directly, Melissa confirms, saying if he agrees to help her, she'll share everything she knows. Then Alan turns his profile to the sky, repeating the word help as if trying to understand what she's asking. At that, Melissa raises her arm showing something above them, and Alan frowns, not understanding what it is. Shifting to the sky, a vision of the Crystal Sky Castle appears, a level 50 dungeon floating among the clouds. Serious, she explains it's not just any dungeon, being considered one of the most brutal for that level. Soon after, a vision of the creatures inhabiting the place appears, hordes of monsters and bosses scattered with no predictable pattern. Beyond the monsters, she warns the traps there have already killed high-level veteran adventurers with a single mistake. In the background of all this, a huge dragon silhouette emerges in the shadows, and Melissa warns the crystal dragon awaits there, on a completely different level from the other bosses. Processing everything, Alan asks directly if what she wants is for him to clear that entire dungeon. Specifying the condition, she explains she specifically needs the item the boss drops, called Jade Dragon Orb, and shows the object's image on a panel. Hearing the item's name, Alan repeats it quietly, recognizing that for someone at Melissa's level, that's an extremely high-value material. Raising her hand toward him, Melissa awaits the answer and asks if he accepts the terms of the deal. Thinking to herself, Melissa recognizes she pushed the conditions too much, and a level 24 would never accept this. But Alan turns and accepts immediately, leaving Melissa completely without reaction to the response. Opening her arms in desperation, she asks if he paid attention, reminding him the dungeon requires level 50 and is still extremely dangerous. Looking at her calmly, Alan simply confirms he knows, saying he probably knows the place better than she does. At that, Alan reveals internally he's already cleared that dungeon several times in ZFO, and observing Melissa briefly, decides he can't let whoever's after him interfere with his progress. Accepting the deal, the two stand face to face on the rocky terrain, and Alan says as long as she accepts, there's no problem. Then she extends her open hand toward him, asking him to confirm the deal, saying out loud she's counting on him. Without hesitating, Alan turns his back and moves forward, saying it's all set, and they can go right now. But Melissa stops and says, unfortunately going now isn't possible. Stopping at the same instant, Alan turns his face and asks why. She raises two fingers and begins explaining, saying the first problem is precisely how to reach the Crystal Sky Castle. Realizing this, she clarifies that since the dungeon is floating in the sky, they need to request it from the kingdom and go through a transfer ritual to get there. Hearing the term, Alan frowns, saying in ZFO, you just had to talk to an NPC and you'd be teleported instantly. Facing him directly, Melissa explains the conditions to participate in this ritual exist, and Alan simply doesn't meet them. Then a panel appears showing any adventurer below level 40 is blocked from the ritual, with Alan at level 24 marked as failed, and Melissa at 50 approved. Turning to Melissa, Alan says they don't need the ritual to reach the Crystal Sky Castle, leaving her confused. Without explaining anything, he crouches down and activates something on the ground, saying first he'll test the idea. At that, a small flying object rises through the air, and Melissa asks amazed if that runs on magic stones. Then Alan sends the device straight to the castle, ordering it to go check the place while the two observe from below. Completely impressed, Melissa says it's obeying his commands, and Alan comments quietly that this technology simply doesn't exist in this world. Cutting the conversation, Alan tells her not to worry about the details and looks at the castle on the horizon, evaluating if there's any barrier around it. Watching the device approach the structure, Alan asks how it's going and awaits the test result. Staring at the scene in profile, Alan keeps his gaze fixed and analyzes every detail of what the device finds up there. Soon after, the device lands smoothly inside the castle, with no blockage, confirming entry is possible without the ritual. Standing beside Alan, Melissa looks up completely incredulous, understanding they can get there without going through the official process. Excited, she suggests building a giant version of the device to carry them both, and already talks about returning to the city to get more members for the group. Shaking his head, Alan refuses immediately and says, just the two of them is more than enough for the mission. Frowning, Melissa asks what will happen with the others, and Alan responds dryly, he doesn't need anyone else. Crossing his arms, he adds he'd actually prefer to go alone anyway, leaving Melissa not understanding where all this confidence comes from. But then he discards the giant drone idea completely, turning his back to her and leaving Melissa without reaction. Explaining the problem, Alan points out the bigger the drone, the worse the consumption gets, and they'd fall before reaching the castle. Staring at him with narrowed eyes, Melissa asks what they do then, expecting a solution. Turning his face with a calculating look, Alan responds they'll use a different type of energy. Something beyond magic stones, a completely new power source. Melissa turns to the side with a serious expression, confirming that there's a new type of energy. Alan responds calmly, revealing that the source of this energy has yet to be explained. The two lock eyes up close, and Melissa's mouth drops open in shock as she hears his answer. Then Alan explains that as a sorceress, she commands multiple elements, and that he's going to transform that into power. Right after, he extends his hands and activates the creation command, materializing something from scratch. Realizing what's happening, Melissa shouts in surprise as she sees a hot air balloon appearing unfolded on the ground. Alan turns to her calmly and asks her to get in, leaving Melissa standing behind him. She looks to the side, confused, asking what she needs to do while holding her chin thoughtfully. Then Melissa prepares herself and fires a wind blast straight at the balloon, filling it up quickly. The two climb into the basket together as the already inflated balloon expands with force. Melissa asks if that's good enough, and Alan confirms that they just need to heat the internal air to fly. Inside the basket, Alan explains that any heat source works, but suggests a specific ability that's more efficient. Melissa immediately activates the indicated ability, engulfing her entire hand in fire with precision. Raising her arm with her hand in flames, she heats the interior of the balloon while Alan watches satisfied. Meanwhile, outside, the balloon already starts moving slowly, lifting off the ground in silence. The balloon rises steadily through the sky while Melissa screams in fear, and Alan calmly explains the physics of flight. Then he warns her not to let the ability go out until they reach the dungeon, or they'll both fall. Meanwhile, the open sky appears empty, and Alan guarantees he'll clear the monsters even being level 24. Melissa closes her eyes and murmurs that she has no choice anyway, with a serious and resigned expression. Flying high over the mountains, she admits that after seeing all of that, she can't resist anymore. Then Melissa opens her golden eyes with determination, convinced that together with Alan, they can conquer the dungeon. Alan looks forward with a cold and calculating expression, saying nothing, already focused on the next step. Arriving at the Crystal Sky Castle, the two walk together toward the dungeon's main gate. Melissa appears exhausted, with marks of effort on her face, but Alan acknowledges the work and she insists she's fine. Upon entering, Alan notices several groups advancing through the corridors and comments on the number of teams present. Then he explains it's an open dungeon where any group can enter, and several warriors are already in combat. The two blast through the corridors and Alan decides they need to advance quickly before any other group. As they advance, he takes down enemies alone along the way, leaving the rest of the teams to deal with what's left. Running, Melissa explains that the dungeon has 3 floors, and they're on the lowest one right now. Alan runs alongside, explaining that to go up to the middle floor they need 3 crystals, leaving Melissa shocked with his knowledge. Alan smiles sideways and warns that he'd love to explain, but information has a price. Melissa responds in kind, saying she's not giving anything away for free either, leaving him without an argument. Then a foot crushes the ground with force, marking the end of the conversation and the start of action. Turning the corner, the two stop and see a group already facing a huge monster up ahead. Getting closer, the monster reveals itself as the Abyss Minotaur, level 45, roaring with full force to intimidate. Melissa suggests switching floors since there are 7 total, and they can skip this one without wasting time. Alan responds with a dry no and moves forward, explaining that skipping floors increases the mission's total time. Getting close to the creature, he calls out to the group ahead, warning that people are piling up behind them. Then Alan crosses his arms and demands they hand over the crystal, looking straight at the monster without showing any fear. A warrior from the rival group explodes in anger, asking who he thinks he is to talk like that. The rival sees Alan's level 24 in the system and gets even more upset, shouting that he's a popsicle. Mocking him, two members of the group spread out in an arc, pretending they're going to hand over the crystal to him nicely. Alan looks straight at them with a cold expression and thanks them, completely serious, without blinking. Alan's already standing on top of the fallen minotaur, with the monster screaming underneath him. Melissa shouts for him to wait because she hasn't recovered her mana yet, with her eyes wide in shock. Not worrying about that, Alan holds the Sandworm's magic stone in the palm of his hand that just dropped. He closes his fist and activates the creation command, transforming the magic stone into crafting material instantly. Then Alan raises a newly created rocket launcher in his hands, with a base attack of 14,500. Melissa looks sideways with her mouth hanging open while he's already aiming the weapon, knowing that with the bonus it exceeds 30,000. Noticing the projectile approaching, the Minotaur roars and raises its club, trying to defend against the impact. Alan looks at the monster with total coldness and murmurs that it's over, without hesitating a single second. Right after, he jumps and fires the launcher with full force, advancing straight toward the boss. The projectile hits the Minotaur directly in the eye, causing a devastating impact that stops everything. Then a colossal explosion consumes the entire Minotaur, while Alan stands with his back turned, observing the destruction. Melissa is hit by the pressure wave and groans, barely managing to stay on her feet with the impact. At the same time, the rival warriors are dragged by the shockwave and scream, completely desperate from the force of the blow. With the Abyss Minotaur defeated, Alan rises to level 25 and holds the conquered crystal calmly. The rivals stand paralyzed in shock, murmuring in disbelief that he killed the boss with a single blow. Melissa approaches slowly from behind with a serious expression, reluctantly admitting it was a good move. Then she stops right in front of Alan with her golden eyes fixed on him, wanting to know exactly what he did. Alan murmurs to himself that maybe he didn't even need to use the Sandworm's magic stone. Then the first crystal appears in the air above him, and Alan raises his arm to grab it, counting out loud. Crouching on the ground, he collects the Minotaur's magic stone while Melissa watches from afar without understanding. Alan already gets up and runs off to the next floor, leaving Melissa shouting for him to wait. Still processing everything, she stands frozen with her eyes wide, not understanding how a level 24 killed a level 45 boss. Switching to the Abyss corridor on the lower floor, the two arrive at a fork along with other groups and stop. Alan explains from the side that the two paths ahead only require passing through the gimmicks to grab the crystals. Melissa frowns and warns that before that they need to deal with the current floor's gimmick, noticing that the path disappears. Alan responds calmly that the path doesn't really end, leaving Melissa with her arms crossed, confused. Then he points to the ground and explains that the transparent floor continues, and whoever walks correctly reaches the other side. Melissa turns to him thoughtfully, wanting to know what happens to those who get the path wrong. Alan stays silent for a moment, and the two look at each other without saying anything. A warrior from another group misses a step, slips, and plummets into the void, screaming while his companions watch. Looking back at the path, he comments beside Melissa that the classic method is using the weapon as a cane to test the ground. Alan explains that marking the ground with the weapon works, but everyone behind them will copy the path immediately. Several groups would take advantage of the marked route, and the confusion would turn into a general brawl through the corridor. Melissa raises her finger with her golden eyes shining, excited with an idea, suggesting that Alan simply create a bridge. Then he turns to her and counters that if it were that simple, someone would have already flown or built something before. Melissa accepts the argument immediately and tries to launch an ability alone to test another solution. But nothing happens, and she stands confused in the same spot without understanding why the ability didn't work. Alan closes his eyes and explains that magic and abilities are blocked on this floor, including his craft. Melissa opens her hands helplessly, asking if they're completely trapped without any way out. Alan lifts his face with a slight smile at the corner of his mouth, guaranteeing there's still a way, while Melissa frowns curiously. On the lower floor of the Crystal Sky Castle, a group advances in formation through the corridor of the Abyss Passage. Walking side by side down the hallway, Alan and Melissa approach the next area, with only 2 crystals left to reach the middle floor. At that moment, Alan stops and mutters quietly that he can't use his creation abilities in there. But he quickly remembers he still has access to his inventory, and from it emerges a heavy, compact piece of equipment. Then Melissa approaches curiously, asking what that thing is that Alan's holding in his hands. Turning to her, Alan explains it's a night vision scope powered by evil bat magic stones, capable of revealing the invisible floor. Surprised, Melissa questions when he would have crafted that, since it seems like next-level stuff. Without hesitation, Alan responds it was while she was getting excited about the view from up there in the balloon. Melissa turns red with surprise, admitting in a low voice that she doesn't even know all the tricks of that dungeon. At that, Alan puts the equipment on his head, explaining that the infrared sensor picks up everything, even with the transparent floor. With the equipment on, the entire hidden structure of the corridor appears before him in dark, defined tones. Satisfied, Alan confirms they can move forward without any problem, while Melissa watches with crossed arms, reluctant to praise. Without warning, he picks Melissa up roughly, leaving her completely without reaction. Looking straight ahead with the equipment activated, Alan responds dryly that he's saving time. Then the two shoot through the dark corridor, with Melissa screaming in surprise as Alan advances without stopping. Melissa yells for Alan to stop, but he responds curtly that she'll bite her tongue if she keeps talking. At that, Alan tells her to relax and shoots through the corridor at high speed, carrying Melissa in his arms with total control. Noticing the scene from far away, the rest of the group goes into shock, unable to believe someone was running through the air like that. Even in the middle of the run, Melissa keeps yelling for him to go slower and more carefully. Reaching the end of the path, the two land at the entrance to the next floor, while Melissa still screams non-stop. Then the path splits in two, and Melissa asks which side is the correct one. Alan responds that both are right, since each route has a crystal at the end, and suggests they split up. But Melissa turns her back on him irritated, and Alan notices in a low voice that she's clearly mad. At that, Alan approaches and stares at Melissa up close, leaving her without reaction and not knowing what to say. Then he decides they'll go together, commenting coldly that it would be a problem if she died along the way. Reluctantly, Melissa grumbles but ends up giving in, and Alan already turns his back and advances, explaining he needs her information about the killer. Changing areas in the judgment path of the lower floor, enormous blades cross the corridor in all directions, with traces of blood scattered across the floor. Standing at the entrance, the two watch the blades passing by, and Alan comments calmly that taking a hit from that would definitely hurt. Without hesitation, Alan materializes a weapon in his hands and faces the corridor with a cold expression, saying only that it's easy. Advancing into the middle of the blades, he destroys one of them with a precise strike, declaring the plan is simply to break everything. Surprised, Melissa comments out loud that abilities work there, and Alan confirms magic does too. At that, Melissa raises her hand and fires a powerful strike against the blades, declaring the place is going to be a breeze. Advancing together through the corridor, the two activate their abilities, and Alan tells them to keep moving forward. Changing areas, in the cliff hall of the lower floor, a crystal hovers at the top of an enormous wall, far above the two of them. Melissa looks up and asks if there's any deadly trap there, and Alan tells her to touch the wall. Placing his hand on the surface, Alan feels it's completely slippery, and questions in a low voice if that was really necessary. Then Melissa raises her finger with a smile, suggesting Alan can climb without touching the wall using his creation abilities. Confirming calmly, Alan says she's finally starting to understand what a real creator can do. Satisfied, Melissa activates an ability in her hand and tells Alan to hurry up, asking if he's going to use the balloon to lift them both. But Alan dismisses the idea immediately, saying the balloon would be overkill for that situation. At that, Alan activates his creation power, concentrating energy in his hands with a completely focused expression. Soon after, a structure appears out of nowhere beside the two, and Melissa backs up surprised, asking what the hell that is. Without taking his eyes off the equipment, Alan presses a panel on the structure and explains that's called an elevator. Then he presses the up button with his hand, activating the mechanism without hesitation. Rising through the air on the platform, Alan explains the elevator goes up and down carrying people or cargo, leaving Melissa completely impressed. Reaching the top, the elevator stops and Melissa comments, amazed at the speed of that thing. At that, Melissa absorbs the second crystal in her hands and confirms only one is left to complete the mission. Without wasting time, Alan already turns and points to the next floor, but Melissa yells for him to wait a second. Changing areas, in the poison swamp hall of the lower floor, the two stop before an immense lake that occupies the entire corridor. Melissa wrinkles her face and questions in a low voice why a poison swamp exists inside a castle, while Alan warns that any contact with that poison applies status conditions. Hearing that, Melissa turns to Alan with a serious expression and asks what crazy creation solution it'll be this time. Alan responds only with a corner smile, saying nothing. Then he activates his creation power right there, concentrating all the energy in his hands with a focused expression. Soon after, a boat appears out of nowhere at the edge of the swamp, leaving Melissa completely without reaction. Trying to stay calm, she repeats to herself that this is totally normal, while Alan already turns and walks toward the vessel. Embarrassed, Melissa murmurs if she'd spoken too loud and asks Alan if some mysterious gadget is going to show up this time. Not caring, Alan responds a simple boat works, so he tells her to get in without stalling. Already inside the boat, Melissa looks around and asks, confused, where the oars or paddles are. Alan looks at her sideways and says that's the team's job, explaining he's leaving it to the group's engine. Melissa raises her eyebrow, completely lost, repeating the word engine in a low voice without understanding anything. At that, Melissa fires her magic through the stern of the boat, propelling the vessel through the swamp at high speed. Holding the magic with a strained expression, she questions if the division of labor there isn't being a little unfair. Meanwhile, Alan's lying in the boat with crossed arms, completely relaxed while she does all the work. Reaching the other side, the two disembark and run toward a pedestal pulsing on the floor ahead. Approaching it, Alan places his hand on the crystal, and a notification confirms the third and final crystal has been obtained. Standing face to face, Melissa admits she thought that mission was impossible, but with the two of them together it was surprisingly smooth. Alan responds with total naturalness that it was obvious it would work, and declares with conviction that Creator is the strongest class in the game. Without even looking back, he turns and simply says it's time for the next step. But Melissa stands still, with wide eyes, murmuring, it's not the class that's the strongest. Then she advances right behind Alan while declaring in a firm voice that the strongest one there is him. Stopping for a moment, Melissa admits they've known each other for a short time, but she can say that with total certainty now. Staring at Alan from afar with fixed eyes, she affirms this guy's going to become an adventurer who'll go down in history. A few minutes later, in the transfer chamber of the lower floor, the two arrive running to a circular platform in the center of the hall. Holding the 3 crystals in the palm of his hand, Alan explains that fitting them all in the pedestal will teleport them straight to the middle floor. At that, Melissa stops and asks something she'd been mulling over for a while, saying Alan never seems to get lost, as if he already knew every corner of that castle. Looking at the crystal in his hand, Alan responds calmly that his life depended on this place once. Without hesitation, he fits the 3 crystals into the pedestal, and each slot lights up in sequence with an immediate system response. At that, the system recognizes the crystals and announces immediate transfer for the two toward the middle floor. Arriving there, on the middle floor before the main entrance, the two appear before an enormous portal pulsing in front of them. Alan comments the middle floor is an instance dungeon, and Melissa finds the idea of a dungeon inside another dungeon strange. Then, Alan compares it to a matryoshka doll, and Melissa asks without understanding what the hell that is. Without stopping walking, Alan promises to make a real one for her when they finish the castle, if she still remembers. Standing before the portal, Alan tells them to move forward, and the two prepare to enter. But Melissa stops and asks him to wait a second. Alan turns his head slightly in her direction, waiting. Then Melissa places her hand on her chest with a serious expression and proposes that, before entering, the two face each other in a duel. Surprised by the proposal, Alan asks if this is a competition between the two of them. Melissa confirms calmly, already explaining the rules she had in mind. She details that the middle floor is divided into 2 distinct areas. In the first area, they'll face a flood of smaller enemies scattered along the path. Then Melissa proposes that whoever takes down more enemies wins, materializing power in her hands as she speaks. Crossing his arms, Alan listens in silence and questions what she's trying to prove. Melissa explains that, being a sorceress, she masters area attacks that sweep entire groups at once. Meanwhile, Alan has already shown he acts differently, eliminating targets one by one with surgical precision. Openly provoking, Melissa asks if he's afraid of losing to her in this competition. Without backing down, she guarantees she'll show what a real sorceress can do. Determined, Melissa makes it clear she won't accept losing to some random adventurer in this challenge. With a calm expression and closed eyes, Alan accepts the bet without hesitation. Sealing the deal, Melissa states that whoever loses pays for the potions, and Alan demands they be top tier. Entering the first area of the middle floor, the two stop side by side before a distant horde. Advancing in a pack, creatures of darkness face them ready to attack. Staring at the horde ahead, Melissa decides it's time to begin. Then, Alan fixes his gaze on the enemies, equally ready for the confrontation. At that moment, the system announces the objective of the trial: eliminate 1,500 monsters. Without hesitation, the enemies advance en masse and chaos already begins to settle in the area. Melissa springs into action, calling her spell, invoking the darkness of night to swallow everything. Responding to the command, a devastating force expands in a spiral, sweeping the entire area around her. Satisfied with the damage, she turns to Alan and asks what he thought of her power. Alan acknowledges her skill without hesitation, but already opens his hand, materializing something much larger. Emerging between his fingers, a heavy rotary machine gun takes shape with capacity for 300 rounds. With a cold expression, Alan warns that it's time to prove what he has to offer. Locking the weapon in position, Alan leans his body and fires a devastating barrage against the horde. Rapid-fire strikes sweep dozens of creatures at once, destroying everything that tries to resist. Without letting up, the projectiles hit dead-on every enemy that appears in the path. Jaw-dropped, Melissa questions what that weapon is, unable to believe the speed and power of the shots. Firm in position, Alan explains the weapon doesn't allow movement during fire, but guarantees for clearing groups it has no rival, giving her a chance to surrender. Furious with the result, Melissa grinds her teeth, refusing to accept she lost in what was supposed to be her specialty. 2 minutes later, the scoreboard appears showing Alan with 811 kills versus Melissa's 689, as she falls to her knees exhausted. Unable to believe it, Melissa murmurs to herself that she even lost in an area clearing competition. Alan looks at her sideways and comments it was a balanced competition, asking her not to get discouraged. Walking past her with calm steps, Alan adds that her only mistake was choosing him as an opponent. Still on the ground, Melissa repeats his phrase mentally, recognizing he really is on another level. Advancing to the second area of the middle floor, the two stop before a new entrance, and Melissa warns the floor boss is coming. Alan keeps his gaze firm ahead, remembering that after this boss only the upper floor remains, and the confrontation with the crystal dragon, which will give them the orb. Walking beside him, Melissa admits that with Alan nearby, this dungeon seems easy, even being considered the hardest for this level range. At the same instant, Alan narrows his eyes, sensing something approaching. Then, an intense energy begins to expand before them, signaling the enemy's arrival. Emerging from nowhere, an enormous claw lands on the ground forcefully, leaving deep marks on the surface. Shortly after, a colossal ogre mounted on a bestial creature advances with a club in its hands, radiating menace. Staring at them with red eyes, the system identifies the creature as Crystal Ogre level 50. Beside it, another massive beast emerges with the same crystalline marks, identified as Crystal Manticore level 50. Advancing side by side, they realize the ogre is mounted on the manticore, forming a duo that acts together. Without wasting time, Alan discards the idea of separating the two and goes for another solution. Materializing a new weapon in his hands, Alan decides to finish both at once using a rocket. Melissa recognizes immediately it's the same weapon he used to destroy the previous floor's boss with a single strike. At that, the system displays the launcher's specifications: 16,000 attack and only 1 projectile, with no additional special effects. Melissa questions if it'll work, and Alan guarantees a direct hit is enough to eliminate both, and this normal version won't self-destruct when fired. Then Alan quickly explains the difference between weapons fused with magic stones, which are more powerful but destroy themselves after use, and normal ones, which can be used multiple times. Roaring and charging at full speed, the ogre and manticore leap together toward them, and Melissa shouts they're coming. Calmly, Alan turns to the side and orders Melissa to freeze the ground immediately. Confused by the command, she hesitates for a second, but obeys and crouches, channeling the spell directly into the floor. Responding to the spell, ice crystals expand at high speed, covering the entire area ahead. Alan calculates silently that the manticore has high evasion capability, so a direct shot would be easily dodged. But with the frozen ground, they have no way to change direction, and Alan concludes they first need to remove their mobility. Trying to escape the ice, the manticore leaps high with the ogre on its back, and Melissa warns they jumped. Flying in the air well above them, the duo falls freely with the club pointed downward, aiming at Alan and Melissa. With a cold, calculating look, Alan murmurs, "This is exactly what he needed." Then he explains that without wings, in the air, both enemies lose all the mobility they had. Without hesitation, Alan fires the rocket straight up, shouting he'll finish both at once. Trapped in the air, the ogre spots the projectile rising at high speed directly toward them. Trying to react, the ogre separates from the manticore mid-fall, dodging the impact at the last second. Melissa and Alan watch from below as the ogre falls separated from the manticore, with the rocket rising between them. The two exchange a quick look, realizing something went wrong with the plan. Using the manticore as a springboard in the air, the ogre pushes itself to the side and escapes the rocket, which explodes on the creature. Melissa can't believe it, murmuring that's impossible to do in the game. Falling to the ground hard, the ogre absorbs the impact with its arms and recovers quickly, ready to attack. Alan opens his eyes attentively, seeing the boss is still standing and intact. Rising, the ogre now advances alone toward Alan, who keeps the weapon aimed. Desperate, Melissa shouts her spells won't stop that, and tells Alan to run immediately. Without moving, Alan maintains his firm posture with his back to her, calculating the next move. Melissa watches with her heart in her throat, remembering Alan is only level 25, without armor, and a direct hit from that boss would be fatal. Determined to protect him, Melissa rushes toward Alan, willing to take the blow in his place. But before she arrives, the ogre already delivers a devastating blow directly at Alan, and Melissa screams no. Running desperately, she realizes with horror she won't arrive in time to do anything. With red eyes fixed on the target, the ogre continues the attack without giving any opening for defense. Standing in the center of impact, Alan keeps his feet firm on the ground as the blow descends directly on him. In tears and lungs at their limit, Melissa screams his name with everything she has. Alan fires at the enemy above, landing a precise and devastating hit. Someone analyzes the move, recognizing that using the monster as a platform was completely unexpected. Meanwhile, the weapon fires another round, and the system indicates it's automatically reloading. Noticing the development, the enemy keeps their eyes fixed on the situation, certain that everything is still going according to plan. Then, the projectile hits its target, and a massive explosion tears through the ground, destroying everything around it. Melissa reacts, dodging the impact at the last second with her agile body and defensive stance. Right after, Alan takes a deep breath in profile, watching the dust settle around him. Leveling up from 25 to 26, Alan faces the notification with a cold and calculating expression. Melissa turns around, eyes wide, asking how he still had ammo available. Alan calmly explains that the weapon has automatic reload when the ammunition runs completely dry. The two stand side by side in the destroyed scenery, and Alan admits that he barely survived. When questioned about his lack of reaction, he responds that he had already planned a second shot from the start. Melissa asks if he really prepares for everything, and Alan picks up a crystal from the ground with his hands. Now they're in a new location, and Melissa warns that the next challenge is the crystal dragon. Thoughtful, Melissa comments that she's seen many adventurers who were simply strong, nothing more than that. Melissa comments that she's never seen anyone as confident as Alan, as the two walk toward the portal. She fixes her gaze ahead, internally concluding that it's no wonder they want him dead. Arriving at the upper floor of the Crystal Sky Castle, the two stop before a large, ornate door. Melissa approaches the door and announces that the time for the final confrontation has come. But Alan warns that the door is just decorative, leaving Melissa confused by the information. The two turn toward an active portal in the room, and he explains that this floor also uses a portal system. Analyzing the entrance, Alan realizes that no portal is visible, and concludes aloud that someone already entered before them. Melissa narrows her eyes, suspicious, processing what he just said. Alan confirms that another group is already inside facing the boss, showing warriors advancing in a flashback. Worried, Melissa explains that if they win first, the two will be expelled and will have to start from scratch. But Alan crouches down calmly, saying that panicking won't solve anything, and proposes using the weight to review the plan. He describes the boss of this floor, the Crystal Dragon, revealing that it has an instant death attack. Melissa's eyes widen, completely shocked by what she's hearing. Alan explains that epic-class creatures rank above boss-class ones, possessing much superior attributes and unique abilities. Sitting on the ground while Melissa remains standing, Alan details that the two characteristics of the Crystal Dragon are the lethal attack and a damage cap per hit. Alan explains that no matter the power of the attack, any damage above the limit is simply cut off. Melissa concludes that not even Alan's absurd firepower will work at full force, and he confirms. In profile, Alan warns that on top of that, the boss has lethal attacks, and they need to define roles before entering. Then he details that in the boss area, creatures are summoned non-stop until it's defeated. With a fixed and calculating gaze, Alan defines that Melissa is responsible for eliminating the creatures while he takes care of the boss. He instructs that when he gives the signal, she should fall back behind him, and Melissa agrees without hesitation. While the two are still waiting, the portal activates and Melissa points, noticing that the other group finished. Analyzing the situation, Alan coldly concludes that they were eliminated, remembering there's no exit from the area. Melissa gets tense, wondering aloud if the dragon's lethal attack was responsible for the group's defeat. But Alan stands up and calmly walks toward the portal, saying they'll be fine if they follow the plan. Facing Alan with firm golden eyes, Melissa warns that she's placing total confidence in him. Without blinking, Alan responds with a single short phrase, taking responsibility for everything. Determined, he advances with Melissa toward the portal, carrying the certainty that he can't die before reaching level 999. Arriving at the boss area on the upper floor of the Crystal Sky Castle, a massive crystalline space reveals itself around them. Before the scenery, Alan silently observes the grandeur of the arena he's about to face. Entering the upper floor, the two come across bodies scattered on the ground on all sides. Melissa comments in shock about the number of corpses, while Alan remains with his back turned, impassive. Without hesitating, Alan warns that it's not time to freeze and moves forward with a fixed gaze. A massive crystalline form emerges from the shadows in the center of the arena, announcing its presence. Alan and Melissa position themselves side by side as fragments cut through the air around them both. Then the crystal dragon reveals itself completely, dominating the entire arena with its colossal body coiled up high. Roaring with its mouth wide open, the epic class level 50 boss presents itself before the two invaders. Melissa takes a step back, eyes wide, processing the real scale of an epic class creature. Alan turns to her and calmly says, not to let the enemy's size intimidate her. Smaller creatures appear around them with glowing red eyes, confirming that the dragon isn't alone. As the dragon moves through the arena, Alan materializes his weapon and assumes an attack position beside Melissa. Splitting up, Alan shouts for Melissa to take care of the creatures, and she accepts the challenge right away. Advancing with the loaded weapon in his hands, Alan fires the first shot directly at the boss. Hit! The crystal dragon roars loudly, recoiling slightly from the impact of the accurate attack. With a sharp gaze and without blinking, Alan concludes that the damage cap isn't a problem, because the Gatling's rate of fire solves that. Firing non-stop at the boss, Alan dominates an epic class monster while Melissa watches impressed. He silently analyzes the situation, concluding that the crystal dragon is dangerous, but has a clear weak point. Motivated by his words, Melissa raises her face with determination, confirming that she'll follow the plan. Then the two attack simultaneously on opposite sides of the arena, with strikes and attacks exploding around them. When the ammo runs out, the weapon jams and stops spinning completely. Noticing the dry click of the weapon, Alan registers the moment coldly and already starts calculating the next step. At the same instant, the crystal dragon raises its head and begins concentrating a devastating attack up high. Catching the dragon's movement, Alan opens his eyes, immediately recognizing what's about to come. Without hesitating, Alan pulls Melissa behind him and warns that the fireproof shield is coming out now. Roaring with its mouth wide open, the dragon launches Death Blaze directly at the two of them. Then the dragon releases the lethal attack in the form of a destructive sphere advancing toward Alan and Melissa. Responding to Melissa's scream, Alan crouches down and uses the craft skill, with his hands touching the ground. A solid structure rapidly emerges from the ground, positioning itself between the two and the deadly attack. Melissa takes a step back, looking amazed at the barrier Alan just created out of nowhere. Crouched behind the structure with Melissa protected beside him, Alan explains that as long as the attack doesn't touch directly, they're safe. Crouched behind the shield, Alan confirms that the Gatling reload also finished, and moves to counterattack. The shield begins to crack under the pressure of the attack, and Melissa warns Alan in panic. Seeing the fissures opening, Alan furrows his brow, admitting that the result wasn't what he expected. With a sharp and tense gaze, he concludes that he bet on the shield's resistance, but it wasn't enough. Then the crystal dragon advances with open claws, destroying what remained of the barrier. With the shield shattering around them, Melissa protects herself with her arms and asks what they do now. In profile among the fragments, Alan thinks quickly, recognizing that even stacking more shields, nothing guarantees they'll hold. At the same instant, the shield explodes completely into pieces, leaving Alan and Melissa totally exposed. Covered in cuts and with her face stained, Melissa screams his name while holding her own wounded arms. But Alan raises his face among the wreckage, with blazing eyes and a clenched jaw, refusing to die in that place. Activating craft with his hands spread across the ground, Alan throws everything he has in a last desperate attempt to turn the game around. Alan charges forward at full force, wielding the extinguisher against the attack coming straight at him. At that moment, Melissa's golden eyes fly wide open, unable to believe what she just saw. It becomes clear what Alan had in his hands, a red extinguisher with a magic stone embedded in the center. Focusing on his angular face, he explains that he grabbed the first thing that came to mind to put out fire. To maximize the object's power, Alan fused the most powerful magic stone he had on hand. Gripping the extinguisher, he runs toward the impact without being sure if this will even work. But with his cold, determined gaze, Alan decides to bet everything on his ability and pushes forward. Then he fires the extinguisher with everything he's got, launching a concentrated force directly against the enemy's attack. Holding the extinguisher tight, Alan sustains the pressure against the advancing destroyer strike coming through the air. Melissa, eyes wide, can't believe that Jet is actually reversing the dragon's attack. Meanwhile, the winged creature still pours out its attack with all the force it has, without backing down. But the extinguisher's force keeps advancing, pushing the monster's strike back inch by inch. With a shout, Alan pushes even harder, bearing the weight of that confrontation practically alone against everything. Then the dragon's attack explodes and disperses in the air, with Alan and Melissa standing in the center of the destruction. Melissa stares at the fragments flying around, still trying to understand what that extinguisher just did. With a cold expression, Alan explains that the extinguisher isn't a weapon, but a tool to put out fire. At that, he brandishes a rotary machine gun and declares it's time to strike back. Then Alan fires with everything, and the impact hits directly into the dragon's body without stopping. Taking each hit, the crystal dragon trembles and its health bar plummets to just 30-20 points. Melissa advances excitedly, thrilled to realize the strategy is actually working. Meanwhile, the dragon still resists trying to rise again, but the two remain firm on the battlefield. With his face tense, Alan shouts for Melissa to forget the smaller enemies and focus only on the dragon with him. Hearing the command, Melissa closes her golden eyes with determination and confirms she understood everything. Then she advances in a wide movement, charging a lateral strike directly against the main target. At the same instant, Alan also delivers a powerful blow, and the dragon's bar drops to 1850 points. Barely having time to react, the dragon takes another combined attack, plummeting to just 370 points. Accumulating each hit received, the crystal dragon's body begins to fragment completely from within. Then everything bursts in an explosion of fragments, and the dragon's bar hits zero all at once. With the mission complete, Alan and Melissa stand still watching the epic confirmation flashing on the screen. Walking side by side through the destroyed field, Alan declares that as long as they win, nothing else matters. Crouching near the dragon's body, Alan picks up the magic stone from the ground without hesitation. At that, Melissa raises her face with her golden eyes fixed on him, asking about the jade dragon orb. Then Alan points to the chest that just appeared in the center of the room, confirming that's the one. Seeing the chest appear, Melissa approaches with Alan right behind, curious to know what's inside. Opening the lid, the two freeze before the jade dragon orb, an epic material glowing in the interior. Holding the item in her hands, Melissa admits out loud that she never believed they'd actually make it this far. But Alan interrupts everything with just one word, telling her to stop before taking the object. Surprised, Melissa turns her face without understanding the reason for that sudden order. Calmly, Alan explains that taking the orb registers the dungeon's completion and automatically ejects them outside. Without letting go of the item, Melissa looks up with a calculating expression and responds with just a "so what?" Then Alan positions himself behind her and asks coldly if she forgot the agreement they made between the two of them. At the same instant, he points a weapon directly at her, reminding her that the deal was for her to reveal who ordered his death. Melissa closes her eyes and agrees that's true, just asking him to put that thing away first. Accepting the request, Alan lowers his arm and puts away the weapon, giving her space to talk. With his face serious and his blue-gray gaze fixed ahead, Alan awaits the answer about who ordered his assassination. Standing in the corridor, Alan keeps the weapon at hand while Melissa leans slightly in front of him. At that, she raises her face with her golden eyes wide, clearly surprised by the question she received. Then Melissa admits, without beating around the bush, that she actually doesn't know who ordered the attack. Not accepting that answer, Alan advances and presses the weapon directly to her head, asking her to explain herself. Pulling back slightly, Melissa guarantees she has information about which organization was behind it, asking for calm. With a short sigh, Alan processes the answer and questions what it means to have a good idea. Then he lowers the weapon slightly and says he'll listen to what she has to say, but only for now. With a serious face, Alan asks directly which organization put a price on his head. Melissa turns her face to the side and responds that it wasn't a common clan, it was something much bigger than that. Pausing before continuing, she reveals that the organization in question is the Adventurers Guild. With his gaze fixed and his expression frozen, Alan asks her to repeat what she just said. Going back in time, two men seated in a meeting room discuss that the guild's purpose is to defeat the Demon King. Then Melissa looks back at Alan and says that would make sense if he were an ordinary adventurer. Turning her face with calculating eyes, she adds that the problem is he's too strong for that. Hearing that, Alan remembers that the assassins who came after him said exactly the same thing. Recalling the assassin's words, Alan repeats mentally that he was too strong, and someone powerful didn't like that. Then Melissa explains that compared to others at the same level, Alan's power was completely off the charts. At that, the image of a solitary warrior before an enormous creature appears, and she questions why that would be a problem. With her arms crossed, Melissa details that if the Demon King dies, the world enters peace, and the guild loses its purpose. Then she continues, saying that to preserve their own position, the faction had been eliminating exceptional adventurers. But she quickly adds that not every guild executive thought this way. Only a specific internal faction operated like this. With his face to the side, Alan asks who led this faction, concluding that eliminating the top would solve everything. Melissa spreads her arms and admits that's exactly the problem, because nobody knows who the leaders are. Then she explains that the faction doesn't support the Demon King's army, they just want to ensure he's never defeated. Returning to the scene, three distinct figures appear, representing merchants, priests, and tavern owners linked to the faction. Running his hand through his hair, Alan murmurs that thinking like that, the list of suspects would never end. At that, the camera shows the guild's imposing building at night, while Melissa concludes that from how they acted, the one who ordered it was inside there. With a firm posture, Alan says he doesn't care who it is, but nothing can hinder his progress, asking how other targets dealt with this. Hearing the question, he himself clarifies that he was referring to promising adventurers marked by the faction, just like Melissa. Irritated, Melissa points to herself and reminds him that she's also one of these promising adventurers, and Alan responds with a simple mea culpa. Recalling the assassin's words, Alan repeats internally that he was too strong, and there was someone powerful who didn't like that. Then Melissa explains that compared to others in the same tier, Alan's strength was completely off the charts. At that, the scene shifts to a vision of the enormous Demon King before a solitary adventurer, and she questions why that would bother anyone. With her arms crossed and eyes closed, Melissa details that if the Demon King dies, the world becomes peaceful. Suddenly, several adventurers are simply thrown out of the Crystal Castle without understanding anything. They wonder in shock if someone somehow managed to defeat the dungeon boss. Soon after, a blue screen appears in the sky, drawing the attention of the entire crowd present. Then, the message announces that Alan and Melissa were responsible for defeating the dragon alone. Seeing the announcement, everyone comments about the famous Melissa, but nobody knows this Alan guy. Meanwhile, the two finally appear at the location, being transported back to the floating city. Noticing the situation, Melissa gets worried and asks how they'll get down safely from there. But he calmly responds that there's no problem, as he'll simply create a parachute for them. Already on the ground, the sorceress is immediately recognized and pointed out by a man in the middle of the crowd. At that, people deduce that the man beside her can only be this mysterious partner. Next, everyone approaches to congratulate the duo on the impressive achievement they accomplished together. Seeing the commotion, she comments with a confident smile about how she's quite a famous person. At that very moment, the crowd surrounds the sorceress, desperately asking how she managed such a feat. Trying to calm the people, Melissa asks for a bit of calm and says the credit isn't hers. Then, she points to her partner beside her, revealing that the real monster was him. Seeing his level, everyone questions how a craftsman managed to get so far without help. Meanwhile, Alan coldly analyzes the high level of all the adventurers gathered at the location. Noticing the situation, he sees the perfect opportunity to sell some of his created weapons. But Melissa interrupts, explaining to everyone that his crafting ability is extremely powerful. Turning to her partner, she asks him to show everyone what he's capable of. However, he interrupts her with a touch, saying he doesn't need to do any of that. To her surprise, he states that she was the one who defeated the crystal dragon alone. Addressing the crowd, he explains that he only provided the necessary support for the great victory. Not understanding anything, the sorceress looks at her partner with an expression of total confusion. Then he just turns his face to the side, keeping his plans secret for now. Deciding not to draw attention, he prefers to save his weapons to sell at another opportunity. Seeing his attitude, a look of understanding appears on the powerful sorceress's face. She then realizes that he's giving her the credit on purpose, avoiding the spotlight. At that, the crowd goes wild, starting to applaud and shout her name. Completely embarrassed, Melissa turns all red and asks everyone to stop with that. Leaving the dungeon, the sorceress still processes everything that happened during the intense final battle. Changing scenery, the story now continues in the bustling and imposing kingdom capital. Arriving there, Melissa says she's going to the guild, while Alan says he'll go to the inn. Then, he explains that he needs to store the magic stones to use in his crafting projects. With that, the two prepare to separate, leaving a strange atmosphere between them. Seeing him leave, she grabs him by the arm, asking for a bit more attention. Suddenly, the sorceress stops and notices something important that had been bothering her all along. He then comments that she got her item, but he left with little valuable information. Bothered by the exchange, she says she doesn't like this feeling of imbalance between them at all. Because of this, Melissa decides she'll continue investigating the preservation faction on her own. She then asks him to relax, but her partner doesn't seem to trust this plan much. At that, she promises that next time she'll be the one taking advantage of his strength. Hearing the promise, a rare and discreet smile finally appears on the craftsman's face. Finally saying goodbye, Melissa asks him to take care and always stay safe. Seeing him walk away, she stands still watching him, with a thoughtful expression on her face. Reflecting on recent events, she wonders if she'll ever be able to reach such power. Suddenly, the sorceress notices a strange presence, and her gaze changes right away. Walking down the street, she feels a strong killing intent coming from somewhere nearby. Hidden in the shadows, a mysterious archer already had his arrow ready to shoot. At that very moment, the sorceress locates the shooter, becoming completely on alert. Then the assassin finally fires the projectile at extremely high speed toward his target. Seeing the arrow going in his direction, she screams desperately, trying to warn him, but before he could be hit, he simply catches the arrow with his hand. Right after, the projectile disintegrates into dust upon contact with his skin. From far away, the archer is completely shocked to see his attack fail impossibly. With the plan ruined, the assassins retreat, fleeing quickly across the city rooftops. At that, Melissa runs to her partner, relieved that he's completely fine. He then lets out a sigh, surprised that they attacked in the very capital of the kingdom. Worried, she says at this rate she can't even walk in peace, much less hunt. Hearing the advice, he agrees to test her method, but his tone gives him away. Teasing him, Melissa offers her protection services for a very friendly price, but he refuses the proposal, saying he'll deal with all this alone. Faced with the refusal, she just says he can count on her help, reminding him with a smile that now they're officially teammates. Meanwhile, the craftsman gets thoughtful about the new definition of their relationship. Noticing the hesitation, she stares at him and asks if there's any problem with that. Then, she warns him not to let himself get caught by any assassin. Looking at her, he guarantees he won't die before reaching level 99. Hearing the confident answer, a slight smile appears discreetly on the sorceress's face. Soon after, she finally says goodbye and leaves, waving to her new partner. Seeing her walk away into the crowd, he stands still for a moment. Going back in time, he always spent all his time playing completely alone, because he always thought it was easier without anyone to slow him down. But now, he begins to think that maybe having companions isn't so bad. Back to the present, he lets out a sigh, somewhat awkward with his thoughts. Decided, he focuses on solving the problem of the assassins who are pursuing him first. The next morning, the craftsman already walks through the capital streets with a new objective. Thinking on the way, he never imagined the faction would force him to come here. Soon after, he finally arrives in front of an imposing white stone fortress. Looking up, a banner reveals it to be the headquarters of the dreaded clan association. Then, he stops before the entrance, facing the building with a cold and determined look. Going back in time, Melissa talks with Alan about how to protect himself from future assassins. Suggesting a quick solution, she says the best way is to join a clan. Then Alan, a bit suspicious, simply questions the idea of being part of a clan. But when she starts to explain, he quickly interrupts her, saying he already gets that. Asking for real, he wants to know why this would be the best help for him. At this moment, an analogy shows that predators always avoid attacking groups and herds. Right after, she explains that large, high-rank clans guarantee much more protection. Reflecting on this, he thinks about the advantage of having powerful people as simple allies of his. Suddenly remembering, he recalls that the guild executives already talked about their clans. In the end, Melissa summarizes that a clan guarantees security and very valuable information. Back to the present, Alan then walks alone toward the city's clan association. Inside, he now needs to figure figure out how to find the perfect clan for his conditions. Watching the newbie, one of the guys in the middle of the crowd ends up recognizing Alan's face. In the same instant, several people around start looking in his direction with great curiosity. Revealing his fame, an adventurer remembers that he broke the record at the wolf mine. Commenting on his achievements, they remember that Alan cleared the castle together with the sorceress Melissa. Analyzing the place, Alan notices that the enrollment counters are divided by clan type. First, one type is Conquest, which only serves to explore and clear dungeons. Besides that, there are defense types: Social, Gathering, Extermination, and also general clans. By the huge lines, he notices that the most popular types are Extermination and Conquest. But for him, the clan's popularity means absolutely nothing at that important moment. Then, an adventurer approaches from behind and asks if he's looking for a clan. Turning his face, Alan simply asks who the man who just spoke to him is. Right after, the guy introduces himself as Max, the leader of the Gazelle's Conquest clan. Saying he heard the rumors, he invites Alan to join his group of adventurers. Hearing the proposal, Alan remains standing in the same place, simply analyzing that entire situation there. In the middle of the conversation, another group appears and tells him to forget Conquest clans. Inviting the newbie, they offer themselves as the Tigers, a famous general-type clan. While the two leaders argue, Alan suggests they hand out numbers to keep order, but the confusion only grows, with the two groups fighting to see who recruits Alan first. Questioning the uproar, a guy says that Alan is just a low-level craftsman, but even so, the entire crowd advances to try to make a recruitment proposal. Getting closer, all the clans offer advantages for him to join one of them. Trying to control the chaos, he asks everyone to calm down just for a second. After a moment, he thanks everyone for the offers, but the conversation isn't over yet. Revealing his condition, he says he only accepts joining rank A defense clans. Upon hearing this, the clan leaders are shocked by his very specific requirement. Without hesitating, Alan simply confirms that's exactly what he's looking for at the moment. It happens that, with a defense clan, he can use contacts with nobles. Using this loophole, he manages to distribute his items to the cities with the excuse of defense. And being rank A, the clan still serves as much stronger personal protection. Making the message clear, he warns that he won't negotiate this condition for any offer. At this moment, all the clan leaders step back, completely speechless to respond. Then, one by one, the adventurer group start leaving and leave him alone. Noticing the exodus, he wonders if all of them will really give up on the initial proposal. Suddenly, a man approaches saying he's still in the running for his pass. Looking at him, Alan simply asks who the man talking to him is. Then, the guy introduces himself as Flynn, an adventurer of level 378. Explaining his proposal, he reveals that he's the master of a rank A defense clan. Seeing his level, Alan is shocked by such absurd power on the server, but Flynn warns that defense clans are stricter and don't give special treatment. Remembering Melissa's advice, he considers the idea of a trial period first, so he responds that he accepts the proposal to join as a temporary trial member. Agreeing with the idea, Flynn sends the official invite using a magical status screen. In the same instant, Alan receives on his screen the invitation to the Sacred Guardian clan. Right after, he simply touches the screen and accepts the clan's recruitment proposal. Confirming his choice, a system message warns that he's now part of the group. After closing the deal, the two shake hands and seal the new partnership finally. Calling the newbie, Flynn invites him to see the clan's main headquarters right now. Arriving at the location, they face the huge mansion that serves as the headquarters. Inside the office, Flynn starts explaining the rules to the newly arrived newbie. Questioning the boy, he asks if Alan understands the function of a defense clan. Then, Alan responds that they intercept the Demon King's army in villages and cities. As the first rule, he reveals that the clan always operates in groups of 3 members. Immediately, Alan questions if he can't continue working in completely solo mode, but Flynn simply confirms with a smile that this won't be possible anymore. Hearing the prohibition, he realizes that staying in groups will delay his level gain. Right after, Flynn warns that he'll only do city patrols for now. Without gaining levels, he would remain vulnerable to attacks from the enemy faction in the city. Finishing the explanation, the master asks if the newbie has any questions about the rules. Facing the dilemma, he needs to choose between leaving the clan or accepting the bad deal. Noticing the silence, Flynn asks if there's any problem with the presented rules, Alan. After thinking, he prepares to make a counteroffer and change the terms of the deal. Then, he says he'd like to ask a very important favor from the clan leader. Showing his intention, he asks to participate in defense missions instead of patrols. Denying the favor, Flynn warns that he needs to follow the rules like everyone else. But Alan says he understands, and that's why he asks for an exception if he proves his strength. Then Flynn, curious about the proposal, asks how he intends to prove his worth. Suggesting a challenge, Alan proposes a duel to settle the matter between the two now. At this moment, the clan leader smiles, liking the newbie's fighting spirit. Declining the duel, Flynn says that unfortunately he cannot agree to the proposal made. With a smile on his face, he regrets, but confirms that he cannot accept the challenge. Not understanding anything, Alan asks why he can't accept the duel between them. Then Flynn simply explains that there's no advantage for him in this type of agreement. Suggesting an alternative, he asks Alan to work normally for at least 1 full week. With no choice, Alan agrees, thinking he can simply quit if he doesn't like the result. Realizing the situation, he understands that continuing to insist on this would be completely useless for him. At that moment, Flynn looks at the door and says they've finally arrived at the office. With a slight smile, he reveals that they are the new members of his permanent team. Right after, the office door opens and 2 people enter the main room. Turning around, Alan observes his 2 new companions for the first time there at the location. Then Flynn introduces Naoki and Hina, explaining that both are from the Lancer class. Getting closer, Naoki introduces himself and greets the newcomer who just arrived. Right after, Hina also greets Alan with a smile on her face and welcomes him. Facing the duo, Alan finally understands that this will be his new mission team. Remembering the rule, Alan questions the choice of members with levels so different from his. Getting closer, Naoki doubts the newcomer's strength, thinking he looks weak. Right after, Hina reprimands him, saying his comment was very rude to the newcomer, but the master defends Alan, saying he's famous despite his level being low. Even so, Naoki insists that being only level 27 is still very bad. At that, he discovers that Alan is an artisan and says his class is garbage. Hearing the name, Hina suddenly realizes it might be that famous artisan from the rumors. Not understanding the reaction, Naoki asks his partner which Alan she's talking about. Then she reveals that he cleared the Crystal Castle only with the sorceress Melissa. Admitting the surprise, Flynn says that this feat is really something very impressive to do. Turning to the master, Alan asks if he also didn't know about this great achievement of his. Explaining the situation, he says he only saw the crowd and went to see what was happening. But even without knowing, he accepted him for believing in the potential that so many people saw. Super excited, Hina celebrates the chance to team up with an adventurer as incredible as him. Still suspicious, Naoki says he might have been carried by the famous sorceress Melissa in the castle. Remembering the conversation, Alan realizes that Melissa wasn't joking when talking about his potential. Then the master suggests that the 3 go out to hunt and test their skills together. Excited about the idea, Naoki and Hina immediately agree to do the first mission, but before leaving, Naoki provokes Alan, telling him to admit he's very weak. Noticing the insistence, Alan decides he'll just flatter the veteran to avoid problems. Pretending to agree with him, Alan says that Melissa really did everything alone in the castle. Hearing the false confession, Naoki celebrates victoriously for thinking he was right all along. Thinking he's the best, he tells Alan not to worry and leave everything to him. Saying goodbye to the master, the 3 finally leave the office for the first team mission. Alone in the room, Flynn realizes that Alan is, in fact, a terrible liar. After all, with his level, he wouldn't even be able to enter the castle by normal rules. Switching to the forest, the trio arrives at a hunting area recommended for level 30. Observing the place, Alan says he never came here because it's a very bad map. Explaining the danger, Hina talks about the monsters that disguise themselves as simple trees there. Seeing an opportunity, Alan says he can create a detection item for the team. Refusing the help, Naoki says the forest monsters aren't a big problem. At the same instant, Alan notices a strange movement coming from the darkness right ahead. Pointing to the side, he warns about a danger approaching very fast toward them. At that, a giant level 35 monster appears in front of everyone. Advancing with everything, the monster lands a blow that throws the whole group far away. Very worried, Hina asks her partner if he's okay after the strong attack. Getting up from the ground, he assures he's fine and ready to continue the great battle. Then he calls Hina to attack the monster with full force and without retreating. Right after, the creature advances again, trying to hit them both with a quick blow. But the 2 jump together, dodging the blow and preparing a counterattack in the air. Preparing their spears, the 2 aim at a vital point on the giant monster's body. Then they descend, hitting the target with several blows in sequence and well coordinated. Observing the fight, Alan analyzes their combat style and teamwork. Bragging about the feat, Naoki asks the newcomer what he thought of his team. Without much emotion, Alan just responds that their work really wasn't bad at all. Yelling to her partner, Hina asks him to focus totally on the fight that's happening. Then Naoki prepares to use a final blow and end the fight quickly. But suddenly, the monster uses a blow that traps them both with great force. Seeing the dangerous situation, Alan observes everything happening from a much safer distance. At that, more monsters emerge from behind, surrounding the group. and also poor Alan. With no other choice, Naoki says that now it's the newcomer's turn to fight alone. With a slight smile, Alan accepts the challenge and prepares to show his strength. Using his special ability, he begins to create an item with his own hand. Right after, he materializes a giant firearm and surprises the whole group there. Upon seeing the weapon, his partners are shocked without understanding what's happening now. Explaining his strategy, he says he doesn't need to aim at specific weak points of the monster, but in the end, he decides he'll simply destroy everything at once. Then he starts firing the weapon and hits all the monsters in the forest. Firing without stopping, he hits all the enemies with a rain of fire blows. Completely shocked, the two are left without reaction to the newcomer's power demonstration. After the attack, the entire forest around is completely destroyed and covered by smoke. Turning around, he says he managed to solve the problem somehow, veteran. Completely paralyzed, his two partners remain shocked, unable to say a single word. Right after, Hina praises him, while Naoki disguises and says it wasn't bad. Suddenly, a mysterious man appears in front of them, interrupting the group's celebration. Hearing the voice, Alan turns around and faces the newcomer in the forest. Standing in front of him, Lucas stares at him with a threatening and very dangerous look. Then he starts walking slowly toward Alan, ready for a confrontation. Getting closer, he says it's been a long time since he saw Alan, but Alan remains still, staring at his old acquaintance with a cold and calculating look. Pretending not to remember him, Alan asks who the guy in front of him is now. At that, Lucas loses it and screams at him not to dare forget his great name. Right after, he accuses Alan of humiliating him at the old wolf mine. Showing his power, he reveals that he's now at level 73 currently. Going back in time, a flashback shows he was only level 65 before. Then he brags, saying he's now way above his previous level. Analyzing the gain, Alan realizes he leveled up a lot in 1 week. By the game's standards, he recognizes the power gain was pretty efficient. Screaming in rage, he reveals he did all this just to be able to defeat Alan. But Alan questions him, saying they can't compete in a forest area. Drawing his sword, Lucas says he'll settle everything in a one-on-one duel. Then the rookie asks what happened to his old adventurer team. With a smile, he says he simply abandoned all those useless people behind without thinking. Seeing the scene, the partners are shocked by the cowardice of the unfair duel. Telling them to shut up, he releases his presence and scares them both with his power. Materializing a new weapon, Alan warns that a duel is a terrible idea for him. But Lucas mocks, saying he already knows the secrets of that firearm of his. Remembering the past, he reveals he got information from the guys at the old mine. With his tongue out, he taunts, saying Alan will create a sword to fight. But without wasting time, Alan fires the weapon and lands a quick hit on his rival. Caught by surprise, Lucas is completely paralyzed without understanding what just happened. Right after, the shot hits his ear dead on and throws him far away. With the weapon in hand, Alan says his information was totally outdated about him. Fallen on the ground, he hears Alan say the next shot won't be a graze. In fear, he panics, seeing blood running all over his face. Scared by the threat, he grabs his sword and runs away from that dark forest. Shocked by the scene, Naoki sees Alan defeat a level 73 effortlessly. In that instant, Hina is completely impressed with the rookie's strength and power. Moving forward, the team walks while she praises her partner's incredible strength. In the end, she admits that a craftsman's strength depends on the user. Saying he loves his class, he asks why Hina chose to be a lancer. Seeing the two getting closer, Naoki panics with great jealousy at that scene. At that, Hina approaches and asks if the rookie has a girlfriend by any chance. Then he gets in front of them both, interrupting the conversation with a desperate shout. Telling her to watch the area, he puts her behind and takes the defensive position. Right after, he points and calls Alan for a private strategy meeting between them. Grabbing the rookie by the arm, he drags him away and leaves Hina behind. Arriving at a distant place, Alan questions the reason for a meeting with just them. But Naoki confesses the meeting was just an excuse for a very serious conversation. Without saying anything, Alan just stands still, waiting for him to start telling the truth. Suddenly, he kneels and begs the rookie not to get close to Hina. Explaining the situation, he reveals the two grew up together and are childhood friends. Then he confesses he's completely in love with her and doesn't want any competition. Hearing the confession, Alan simply lets out a long sigh of relief and exhaustion. With no interest in the drama, he just turns his face and waits for it all to simply end. Saying he doesn't care about romance, Alan offers to help his partner win her over. Then he explains they'll put on a show in the fight against the forest boss. First, the plan is for him to start fighting the monster completely alone at the beginning, but Naoki thinks with his power, he won't even have a chance to fight. Revealing the trick, he says he'll lower the damage and pretend he's losing. Explaining the weakness, he tells him the monster is slow and easy to defeat alone. Super excited about the plan, Naoki hugs him and thanks him for the great help with this. Returning to their partner, the two walk together to finally defeat the forest boss. Arriving at the location, the team finds the Forest King, a level 30 boss. Looking at the monster, Naoki is impressed by the giant size of that large creature. Without wasting time, Alan says there's no plan and tells them both to fall back now. Then Hina puts her hand on his shoulder and says she's counting on him a lot. Seeing the scene, Naoki complains again, telling her to stop clinging to him. Ignoring his partner, he activates his ability to materialize a new combat item. Right after, he materializes an assault rifle and prepares for the big battle. Adjusting the weapon's power, he prepares for the big battle against the boss. Meanwhile, Hina gets super excited seeing the new weapon he created. Then he explains this weapon is a much weaker assault rifle. Running toward the monster, he fires several shots at once to test, but the attacks seem to cause no damage to the forest boss's body. Completely confused, Hina doesn't understand why the shots aren't working on the enemy anymore. Pretending he's losing, he says the attacks aren't working on the monster. At that moment, Naoki advances to save the day and protect his partner in trouble. Yelling to his partner, he tells her to just watch her great hero in action. Even worried, she stays still, just watching what will happen to her friend. Dodging the attacks, he runs across the battlefield and prepares for the strike. With all his strength, he uses his spear and prepares a special and powerful attack. Right after, he hits the monster with a powerful strike right in its middle. Seeing his great power, Hina is super impressed with her partner's incredible strength. Watching from afar, Alan just watches the outcome of the plan he himself created. Boasting about his strike, he says there was no other possibility for the result. Taunting the monster, he yells and says it's just size without strength. But suddenly, the monster reacts and lands a hit from above his body. Realizing the attack, he's paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. At that, the blow throws him hard to the ground, knocking his spear far away. Seeing the danger, Hina panics and screams for him to wait for help. Unimpressed, Alan just watches his partner fallen on the ground, doing absolutely nothing. Right after, the monster advances to finish the adventurer lying on the ground. Then the boss uses its roots to trap and attack the poor boy's body. At the same instant, Alan pulls Hina back and protects her from the imminent danger. Desperate, Naoki screams while the monster prepares its final blow against the target. Tired of the scene, he materializes a new weapon to end the fight quickly. Pulling the trigger, he fires a full-force strike against the giant monster. In that instant, a massive explosion completely destroys the forest boss in front of him. Shocked by the scene, Hina is left speechless seeing the rookie's power. Meanwhile, Naoki shields himself from the explosion and braces for the heavy impact. On the ground, he finds a rare item that dropped from the monster after the big explosion. Coming closer, Alan helps him up and levels up with the victory. Very impressed, Hina says he defeated the monster with just a single blow. Right after, she clings to his arm and asks how he did that. Jealous, Naoki gets furious seeing the girl getting close to his new partner. Yelling at the rookie, he says he didn't need to butt into his fight. Annoyed by the scene, she scolds him and says he should be more grateful. With no way to respond, he freezes from the scolding he got from his partner. Turning to the rookie, she apologizes for her old friend's childish behavior. In the end, Alan understands he just wants to impress the girl he loves. Commenting on the victory, she says he struggled at first, but won in the end. Hearing the compliment, the two partners get super excited and look at the rookie. Then he explains that the victory was all Naoki's, who weakened the monster before. Confused by the story, she asks if that's really what happened in the big battle. Seizing the chance, he confirms the story and says the rookie just interfered. Noticing the humility, she praises him, saying he's strong and very mature. In that instant, she hugs him tight and leaves him completely without any reaction. With shining eyes, she invites him to hang out and get to know each other better later. Hearing the invitation, Naoki is left in shock and his soul leaves his body in sadness. Tired of the situation, Alan realizes the drama between these two will only be trouble. Back at headquarters, the trio reports to the master after the mission. With a smile, Flynn asks the team how the experience with Alan was. Excited, Hina says he defeated a boss and a level 70 swordsman. Without giving details, Alan says some guy from the mine came to pick a fight with him. Hearing the story, Flynn realizes the guy was Lucas, his acquaintance. Remembering the past, he mentions that Lucas has picked fights with clan members before. Then he warns that Alan can use the clan's name to protect himself from him. In that instant, Alan understands the true power of a high-rank clan in the game. But for now, he just says he's happy everyone is well and safe. Thanking them for their work, he dismisses the group after their long and tiring first mission. With a smile, Hina invites the master to a welcome party for Alan. Politely, he declines the invitation and says he still has a lot of work to finish first. Hearing the refusal, she says then she'll just go out with the group's rookie. But the master warns they can't take too long to return to the main headquarters. Intrigued by the warning, Alan asks if something important happened with the big clan. Then he reveals that the group received a new, very special mission request, and to her surprise, the request was made directly for the group's rookie. Shocked by the news, he can't believe he already received a mission on the first day. Explaining the mission, he says it's not a defense one, but rather special. The mission's client wants him to use his weapons for the city's people. Questioning the mission, he asks if the job is just to deliver his new weapons. At that, the master reveals the mission will be in the city of Biandarl, the frontier. Hearing the name, the group reacts to the mention of the kingdom's dangerous city. In a flashback, the city's leader wants to use the weapons for its defense, but even so, he offers the rookie the chance to refuse the special mission. Without thinking twice, he accepts the mission right away and confirms his participation. Thinking about the advantage, he sees the chance to spread his weapons and gain experience. With the mission accepted, Alan asks if this confirms his official entry into the clan. Then the master confirms he was approved in the clan's trial period. Reflecting on the agreement, he finds it strange to receive a mission while still in the testing phase, but he just informs that the three of them need to go together to the city tomorrow. Grabbing his arm, Hina invites him to explore the city after the mission. At that, Alan says she needs to learn to have a little more tact. At the end of the conversation, he turns to the master and accepts the mission. Calling his partner, he invites her to leave the office and prepare for the mission. Stopping before leaving, Alan asks one last thing to his clan's master. Then the master, with a smile, just asks what he wants to know at that moment. Questioning the mission, he wants to know how the client found out about his entry into the clan, but Flynn explains that the clan's member list is updated in real time. Continuing the question, he wants to know how the city's leader would know who he was. Noticing the distrust, the master asks if there's any problem with that special mission. Finding everything strange, he says the information about him traveled way too fast. Seeing the dissatisfaction, the master offers the chance to cancel the mission and not participate. Right after, he accepts and leaves the room, promising he'll fulfill everything perfectly. Shifting to the city, the group arrives at their destination for the delivery mission. Walking down the street, Naoki asks the rookie if there's something wrong going on with him. With a serious expression, he keeps thinking about the strangeness of that so sudden and specific mission. Remembering the master, he begins to question the true intentions behind that request. Arriving at the great fortress city of Biandarl, the group prepares to enter. Using a teleport, the trio finally reaches their main destination. Alan, Hina, and Naoki gather in front of the great gate. But upon entering, they find the streets completely empty and very silent. Looking around, they realize all the shops are completely closed. Even the soldiers on the walls look exhausted and totally worn out. Analyzing the situation, Alan notices something is very wrong here. Suddenly, one of the wall guards desperately shouts a warning. Turning around, the group finds themselves surrounded by soldiers at the gate. At the same instant, Naoki panics at the unexpected ambush. Right after, a giant monster appears right in front of everyone. Hina is also completely shocked seeing the size of that creature. Meanwhile, a soldier braces for the monster's impact. During the attack, Alan quickly activates an item from his personal inventory. Using his ability, he materializes a new weapon to fight the lizard. Aiming the weapon, Alan taunts the monster with a very confident line. Jumping back, he fires a projectile that causes a giant explosion. Right after, Alan lands on the ground as fire spreads around. Seeing the result, Naoki is amazed by the power of that unknown weapon. Beside him, Hina watches him with a slightly flushed and surprised face. Even the soldier observes the scene without understanding how the monster fell. Celebrating the victory, Hina smiles as Alan dismisses the created item, but the soldier quickly warns that the battle wasn't over yet. Just then, several giant bird-like monsters emerge running in a group. Seeing the reinforcements, Alan just stares at the new threat approaching. Suddenly, an unknown person appears on the battlefield shouting. Mounted on a creature, the warrior advances alone against all the monsters. With a single strike, he defeats several enemies at once. Because of the impact, the remains of the monsters end up flying in his direction. Stopping in front of the group, the warrior introduces himself to Alan. Introducing himself, the mounted warrior reveals himself as Goldor, the captain of the guard. He explains he came by Lady Olivia's orders to escort the group. Alan soon realizes Goldor is hiding his status information. Then, he invites them to board a luxurious carriage nearby. Seeing the transport, Hina and Naoki are totally impressed and jaw-dropped. As they walk, Alan thinks all this treatment is an exaggeration. Inside the carriage, Goldor explains the war has affected the city's finances, saying the weapons created by Alan are the hope for victory. Hearing the explanation, Alan finally understands the entire great responsibility. Accepting the mission, he walks toward his next great destination. But Alan still wonders about the whereabouts of the Demon King's faction. Changing scenes, a man sits alone in a guild room. Analyzing some reports, he reviews information about the attack on Alan. He also discovers the defense clan has already arrived in Biondarl. Revealing himself, this man is Zane, an executive of the Adventurers Guild. Analyzing the reports, he studies the unique weapon created by Alan. With this, Zane decides he needs to move as quickly as possible. Soon, he concludes Alan will be a major obstacle to his plans. At that moment, a man in a hat enters his meeting room. Then, Zane receives the kingdom's greatest artisan for a private conversation. Revealing his identity, the man introduces himself as Hiroshi, the level 175 artisan, but Zained questions the presence of the young woman accompanying him. With a smile, the woman introduces herself as Annette, Benjamin's daughter. Confident, she guarantees she has the same skill as her father for the task. Still suspicious, Zane finally accepts the help of the two newcomers. Then, he prepares to start the meeting and explain his plan. Placing the weapon on the table, he asks them to analyze the item. Upon seeing the object, both are curious about the creation structure. Hiroshi then picks up the weapon to better understand its function. Excited by the discovery, he turns to test it immediately. Firing at the statue, Hiroshi tests the firepower of the created weapon. He then smiles, completely impressed by the speed of the shots in sequence. Annette also gets nervous, imagining how strong the creator of that item was. Soon after, Hiroshi admits even he couldn't create something so powerful. At that, Zane reveals shocking information about Alan's real level. Upon hearing the truth, Annette and Hiroshi are completely stunned and without reaction. He then confirms the information is true despite being unbelievable. Therefore, Zane asks them to analyze and create a similar model. Holding the weapon, Annette explains how its power scales with level. She then states Hiroshi can create a much stronger copy. Hearing the analysis, Zane fully agrees with the girl's conclusion. With a frightening smile, he finally begins plotting his evil plan. He decides he will assemble an army of artisans to produce weapons. And with this new power, his only final objective will be to eliminate Alan. Arriving at the imposing lord's mansion, the group approaches the main entrance. Inside, they're led to the throne room to meet the ruler. Seated, she introduces herself as Olivia, the great lord of these lands. Showing her face up close, she stares at everyone with a very serious look. Alan then responds to her greeting in a very direct and unceremonious way. Beside him, Hina quietly scolds him for his lack of manners with the lord, but the ruler just smiles, saying there's no problem with his attitude. Getting straight to the point, Alan asks where he should deliver the weapons. However, she asks him to first explain how that weapon called a pistol works. Agreeing right away, he uses his ability to materialize an item. Seeing this, the Lord's eyes widen at the impressive scene. Soon after, a complete firearm finally appears in his hands. In the background, the hall guards comment about the unknown object. At that moment, the guard near the throne jumps back, completely startled by the weapon. Not caring, Alan just holds the weapon to begin his demonstration. Without thinking twice, he fires an entire burst in Naoki's direction. Then Naoki stands up furious, but Alan says he only shot on impulse. From the throne, Olivia is amazed by the potential of this new firearm. Imagining the defenses, she thinks about how civilians can fight from atop the walls. At this moment, Hina turns and asks a question directly to the Lord. With a serious expression, she questions why civilians need to fight in the war. Confused by the question, Olivia just stares at the girl without really understanding. Hina then tries to explain that the soldiers alone would be enough, but Olivia reveals that the real problem is the cost to maintain the clans. She explains that even with few attacks, they need to always be prepared. That's because the city needs to pay for several different defense clans. Not understanding anything, Hina hears Alan explaining that the city is out of money. The Lord then confirms that the weapons will reduce defense costs. Upon hearing the word urgent, Hina gets confused and Alan explains the meaning. Impressed by the response, she praises him, her face turning red. Meanwhile, Naoki tries to interact with Alan, who doesn't seem to pay much attention. Cutting the conversation short, Alan says he needs to start creating the weapons soon. Then the Lord agrees and points to the central plaza as the work location. Before leaving, he reinforces that the weapons don't harm humans, being safe. At that, he approaches and hands the weapon directly to the Lord on the throne. Observing everything, the guard beside her stares at Alan very seriously. Next, a soldier appears to take Alan's group to the plaza. Analyzing the object, she notices the specifications of the weapon she just received. With the weapon in hand, she asks for her guard Goldor's opinion. Then he responds that the weapon's power is impressive for a craftsman. Hearing the analysis, she comments about the commotion he caused at the guild, but Goldor explains that the attack power depends heavily on the creator's stats. Remembering Alan, he points out that his level is abnormally low for this. At that, Olivia asks if Alan would be capable of defeating the Demon King. Evaluating the situation, Goldor states that the possibility of this is quite high. With a thoughtful look, Olivia reflects on the potential she just witnessed. Then she smiles, confirming that her decision to call him there was right on target. Shifting to the central plaza, the city residents begin to gather slowly. Grouping around a crate, they observe the equipment with great curiosity. At that, an older man picks up one of the weapons, doubting its effectiveness. Inside the crate, several rocket launchers await distribution to the people. Later, the group takes a break to eat at a local tavern. Eating pizza, Alan creates more weapons, impressing Naoki with his great skill. Remembering the past, he tells how he's already distributed weapons to other villages before. Noticing a detail, Hina asks why he never uses any accessories. She then suggests that his items would be even stronger with the bonuses. Confirming the theory, he says that for now, his power is already enough. Irritated, Naoki drinks and complains about how nice it is to be strong and ignore equipment. Moving closer to him, Hina makes Naoki explode with jealousy in the corner of the table. But Alan explains that he prefers defense items against negative status, not attack ones. Thinking about the danger, he reflects that he needs to take equipment more seriously. Suddenly, a loud noise interrupts the meal and startles the entire group. Right after, a city guard runs into the tavern desperately. Urgently, he warns everyone that the Demon King's army is attacking. Hearing the news, Hina and Naoki are completely paralyzed with fear, but Alan just turns his face, facing the situation with his usual calm. Meanwhile, an enemy troop advances rapidly toward its objective. Marching in great numbers, the army of monsters finally surrounds the entire city. On the wall, the defenders watch the enemy army approaching on the horizon. Already positioned, Alan and his friends prepare alongside the civilians to defend. Seeing the scene, a group of adventurers questions the presence of civilians on the wall. Looking closer, they notice that everyone is holding weapons with a very strange shape. In front of everyone, Alan demonstrates how they should use this new equipment. Super excited, Hina and Naoki celebrate, eager to start shooting already. Seeing the excitement, the woman from the other group calls them a pathetic clan. Just then, a status window reveals that Hina belongs to the Sacred Guardian clan, but even surprised, they say she must be from the lowest rank. Shifting focus, attention turns to Alan, the level 28 craftsman. With a fixed gaze, he faces the horde of monsters slowly approaching. From his point of view, a sea of enemies covers the entire battlefield. Analyzing the adversaries, he realizes their number is simply absurd. Soon after, a nearby commander gives the order for everyone to prepare to attack. In the same instant, Alan and the civilians point their weapons, ready to fire. At the same time, the other defense clans also prepare for the attack. Seeing the advance, the guard commander gives the battle cry to fire. Following the command, the civilians fire their weapons with full force from the wall. With that, a rain of projectiles is launched toward the enemy army. Watching everything, Alan keeps his gaze calm and focused on the battlefield. Then, a series of explosions happens, covering the entire monster army. In the middle of the smoke, Hina and Naoki are shocked by the power of the explosion. With the result, Alan faces the battlefield with a calm expression. Even the commander is completely paralyzed, looking at the smoke in disbelief. In an instant, half the enemy army was completely annihilated by the attack. Without wasting time, the group begins preparing the weapons for the second shot. With everything ready, Alan prepares to give the new attack order. Excited, the civilians fire again, celebrating the power they just received. From afar, the other group of adventurers is shocked by what they witnessed. Their commander is also left speechless, surprised by the power of the weapons. Warning the captain, Alan points out that some enemies survived the massive attack. Seeing the remaining monsters, the captain realizes they continue advancing on the wall, so he orders the civilians to fall back, leaving the rest to the soldiers. Next, the city's archers prepare to shoot at the survivors. Sitting in the corner, the other group of adventurers regrets not having fought, but with the last attack, the Demon King's army was finally defeated. Celebrating the victory, the commander and civilians raise their fists very happily. Soon after, everyone turns to Alan, thanking him and calling him a hero. But Hina notices his expression, questioning why he doesn't look happy at all. Confused, she remembers he gained 2 levels and reached level 30. He then explains that without the limit, he would have gained more than 10 levels. Hearing that, Hina remembers the important exam to be able to level up. Upon reaching level 30, they need to take an exam to break the limit. Analyzing the field, he laments the lost chance to gain so much experience. With a frustrated look, he thinks how everything would be different with the attack. Advancing through the wall, Lord Olivia approaches everyone for a conversation. With a smile, she congratulates Alan on his excellent and quick work in the defense. In the background, the other group of mercenaries comments on the ruler's appearance. Observing the field, she says she's surprised by how quickly the battle ended. With a curious look, she questions why the weapons are different from hers. Alan then responds that he adjusted them all to cause massive area damage. Hearing the explanation, she says that now the civilians can defend the city. Right after, she terminates the contract with all the defense clans. With the news, the other group of adventurers is completely shocked and scared, but she offers Alan's clan triple the payment for the service. Learning of the contract, Hina and Naoki celebrate the achievement along with Alan. Desperate, the other clan's leader tries to argue against the harsh decision. With a cold look, she faces him, questioning the usefulness of his clan. Faced with the response, the group of mercenaries is left speechless, completely paralyzed. Finalizing the matter, she says they are no longer necessary for the city. Arguing on the wall, the civilians revolt against the useless defense clans. Beside them, the Lord's Guard just listens to the shouts attentively. Out of patience, they send the mercenaries away for being tax thieves. Seeing the confusion, Olivia then raises her hand to ask everyone for silence. Even so, she offers help to pay for the trip back home. Angrily, the group's leader just grits his teeth at the proposal. Walking along the wall, Hina comments that she took work from the other adventurers, but the Lord tells them not to feel guilty about this situation. Explaining the situation, she says that Alan brought security to all the residents. Because of this, the families of the entire city can smile happily again. With a smile, she asks Alan to bring this security to other cities. Then Hina and Naoki accept the new request with a very excited smile. Hearing the conversation, the dismissed mercenary looks back with a serious expression. At this moment, he realizes his mercenary business might end forever. Already thinking about it, Alan decides to return to the capital to take his exam. Watching Alan walk away, the mercenary blames him for that entire situation. With a clenched fist, he curses Alan for having ruined his business. Then he runs and calls out to Alan, pretending to be interested in his weapons. Stopping for a moment, Alan turns to listen to the man's request. Just then, the mercenary opens a smile, revealing his true and dark intention. Without even hesitating, Alan strikes the man with a strong blow to the chest. With the impact of the blow, Alan is thrown far away, falling from the wall. Seeing everything from afar, Lord Olivia also watches the scene in shock. Looking down, the man just watches the fall of his great rival. With a victorious smile, he celebrates the fall of the man who ruined him. Falling, Alan grits his teeth, frustrated by the surprise attack he suffered. At that moment, Hina and Naoki run to the edge, screaming desperately for their friend. But he turns in the air, preparing his weapon for the impact. Turning in the air, he faces the ground with a completely determined look. Then he points the weapon downward and fires with all his strength. Right after, the weapon's explosion propels his body away from the ground. From above, the mercenary watches the scene, shocked that he fired. The Lord and her guard also observe the maneuver, surprised by the strategy. Landing on the ground, the force of the explosion throws him against the wall. Arriving at the spot, his friends run to see if he was okay. After that, he explains that he used the explosion to nullify the fall. Frightened by the scene, the mercenary stands paralyzed, hearing the civilians curse at him. From atop the wall, the Lord and her guard observe the scene quite seriously. Worried, Hina quickly approaches and offers a potion for him to heal. Meanwhile, the mercenary watches everything from above, still paralyzed with fear. Taking the potion, he turns around, facing the enemy with a furious look. Very frightened, the mercenary just swallows hard, not knowing what to do. Using his ability, Alan creates a trampoline to get back on top of the wall. Jumping on it, he's propelled upward with full force, surprising everyone. Right after, he lands in front of the mercenary who tried to attack him. Seeing that, the man's eyes widen, completely without any reaction. Around them, the other city residents are also shocked by his ability. Even the other group of adventurers is surprised by that impressive scene. Materializing a new weapon, he points it directly at his enemy's face. At the same instant, the man kneels on the ground, begging for his life. But Alan stares at him coldly, ready to shoot at any moment without hesitation. At that moment, Lord Olivia arrives and asks him to stop the attack. Questioning the Lord, Alan asks why she's trying to stop him from acting. With a calm voice, she begins to explain the reason for her intervention. Then she warns that if he attacks him, he'll be accused of a crime. Besides that, she doesn't want to tarnish the city's historic victory with this. Understanding her point, he finally gives up on the attack and lowers the weapon. Next, he turns around and starts walking away from the mercenary. Seeing that he was spared, the man breathes relieved, still sweating bullets. But Alan uses his ability and creates a catapult underneath the kneeling mercenary. With the impulse, the mercenary is hurled high into the air, flying. Upon seeing the scene, the Lord is completely surprised by the unexpected action. Turning his face, he says that was just a catapult prototype. Meanwhile, the man screams desperately as he flies away from the wall. To finish the play, he materializes a large blue block in his path. Falling backward, the mercenary lands on top of a large blue mattress. Completely dizzy, he ends up upside down, stuck in the soft object. Seeing that the man survived, the civilians sigh, still impressed by the situation. With a threatening look, Alan warns that next time he won't go easy. At that moment, the man dematerializes from the mattress and apologizes desperately. Walking back and forth, Alan reflects on people who attack on impulse. Thinking about the future, he decides he needs to find a way to avoid provocations. The next day, the group prepares to finally leave the city behind. Ready to depart, he says he's going straight to the guild to take his exam, but his friends complain, saying he should be the one to tell about his achievement. Not caring, Alan says he prefers experience points instead of bonuses. At that moment, the Lord's Guard approaches and calls out his name. Turning around, Alan asks what he wants since the job was finished. Then the guard asks the group for help with a very different matter. Hearing the proposal, Alan's group falls silent, waiting for the explanation. He then reveals that there's a large bandit hideout in the nearby forest. Curious, Hina wonders about the danger of a hideout outside the city. To convince him, the guard promises a very large monetary reward for him, but Alan refuses immediately, saying his focus is passing the exam. Seeing them leave, the guard offers information as new payment for him. Upon hearing the proposal, Alan stops walking instantly, quite curious. With an interested look, he questions what kind of valuable information that would be. Then the guard reveals it's about the pro-demon faction that's pursuing him. Looking at him, Alan listens with complete attention to the captain's revelation. Right after, he says someone from the faction is already very close to him. Worried, his friends look at each other, totally frightened by the revelation. Then Alan asks if he reveals the name in exchange for his help. The guard then explains that his duty is to follow the Lord's orders. Reflecting on the danger, Alan decides he needs to deal with this faction. Agreeing to the exchange, he finally accepts to take the new job for him. Before they leave, he turns to ask one last question to the guard. Then he questions why the soldiers can't take care of these bandits. Explaining the situation, he says the decision was from Lord Olivia herself. Then he reveals that she greatly admires the abilities that Alan possesses. Upon hearing the comment, Alan just stares at everyone with a very serious expression. Smiling, the guard says he'll accompany the group on the bandit mission. Then Alan asks his friends to go back and report everything to Flynn, but they refuse, saying they also want to go and fight in the mission. Insisting on the idea, he says that was a personal and solitary request. Reinforcing the order, the guard also tells them to return to the capital soon. Grabbing him, the friends promise they won't get in the way of the mission at all. Seeing the scene, the guard finally gives in and accepts that all four will go. Then he starts walking ahead to lead the group's way. Following the guard, Alan looks back with a very thoughtful expression. Walking through the city, he notices how much the place's atmosphere has improved. As they pass, the residents smile and wave to the group of heroes. Right after, he and the guard head together to the city's exit. Putting all the pieces together, he concludes that Olivia is part of the enemy faction. Remembering the demonstration, he had only shown the version that didn't hurt people, but when he pointed the weapon, she reacted as if it were murder. With that attitude, he understands that she knows the weapon's real power. Realizing the trap, he prepares to finish off the guard very quickly. Entering the forest, the group moves forward along the path while someone warns about bandits hiding up ahead. Goldor leads the advance with a serious expression, and Alan agrees to proceed with the group. Then Naoki offers to handle the forest monsters along with Hina, excited and confident. But Alan stops everything and materializes something from his inventory, dismissing the need to enter the forest. Holding a metallic device in front of him, Alan announces they'll eliminate the bandits from right here. Seeing the strange object, Goldor frowns, not understanding what that piece of metal is. Then Alan explains, it's a drone, capable of tracking and eliminating any bandit hidden in the forest. The drone takes off on its own, while Naoki and Hina step back impressed by what they're seeing. Raising his hand, Alan announces it's time to clean out every bandit hiding in the forest, but Goldor shouts for him to wait, interrupting Alan before the order is given. Turning to face Alan, Goldor positions himself between him and the drone, refusing to approve that method. Unfazed, Alan responds coldly that the drone will only attack those who are armed. But Goldor doesn't yield, and calmly counters that the situation isn't that simple. Alan turns his face and stares at Goldor with a cold gaze, asking why it wouldn't be. Goldor raises his voice and explains that hostages could be killed in the middle of the confrontation, demanding absolute caution. Alan shows a subtle smile, commenting that the hostage issue came out of nowhere. Then Alan turns to Goldor and proposes that he enter the forest alone, with drone support. The drone hovers in the air while Alan explains that, being a level 30 creator, he doesn't need to go personally. But Goldor explodes, shouting that this directly contradicts Lady Olivia's orders. Hearing this, Alan narrows his blue-gray eyes, realizing that Goldor really wants to force him into the forest. Yielding for now, Goldor admits that breaking orders would be wrong, and the two set off together without delay. Walking side by side toward the bandits' hideout, Alan already knows the real target is his own head. The entire group enters the forest, advancing in silence through the dense, heavy vegetation. Hina warns there are no monsters nearby, and Naoki responds that this makes things much easier. But Alan suddenly stops the group, ordering everyone to stay quiet in place. Pointing to the ground, Alan warns coldly that there's a trap right in front of Naoki's feet. A huge stake appears suspended above them, and Naoki recoils horrified at what he's seeing. Alan analyzes the trap and concludes it's sloppy work, probably hastily set up by the bandits themselves. Naoki panics and starts fidgeting, and Alan tells him to stop moving around like an idiot. Then Alan pulls out a tool and cuts the trap's rope, explaining that this world's technology has very clear limits. Staying calm, Alan neutralizes the trap while Naoki steps back, startled by the precise strike. Moving forward through the forest, Alan comments he could even handle landmines, leaving Naoki and Hina speechless. Goldor advances in silence, his green gaze fixed, and his expression more closed than ever. As they get closer, the group spots the bandits' hideout, full of cabins scattered throughout the clearing. Naoki counts at least 100 enemies at the location, and the entire group hesitates before the size of the threat. Then Alan narrows his blue-gray eyes, assessing the situation with absolute coldness. Meanwhile, Goldor positions himself at the front and begins activating something in his own hand. A ring begins pulsing in Goldor's hand, releasing something only he controls. Seeing this, Alan suggests everyone follow Captain Goldor's leadership, since he clearly already has a plan. But Goldor grits his teeth, questioning internally whether Alan has already figured out what he's scheming. Letting it go, Goldor smiles slightly to himself, deciding it's time to make the next move. Then Hina turns to Goldor and asks what the next move is, not hiding the tension on her face. Materializing a huge spear beside his body, Goldor announces they'll give a chance for surrender first. Without visibly reacting, Alan observes everything from the side with a calculating and completely impassive gaze. Goldor advances to the front, carrying the spear on his shoulder, ordering everyone to follow his command. Advancing openly along the path, the group approaches the camp while the bandits watch them confused. Then Hina and Naoki exchange a tense look, questioning whether walking in the front door like this isn't insane. Goldor raises the spear and announces himself as guard captain, demanding the bandit chief appear. Hearing this, a door slowly opens and a silhouette emerges from inside, responding coldly to Goldor. Coming out with a crooked smile, the bandit chief taunts Goldor, saying he thought he'd died in the traps. But the chief frowns, seeing the entire group, remembering the deal was for Goldor to come alone. With completely disturbed yellow-gold eyes, Goldor explains the others insisted on coming and orders them all killed. Naoki and Hina step back shocked, not believing what they're hearing from Goldor. Then Alan closes his eyes for a moment and comments that everything turned out exactly as he expected. Confronting Goldor face to face, the bandit chief negotiates a bonus for the service, while Goldor tells him not to get too excited. The chief discusses what to do with Hina, but the gang decides she must be eliminated anyway. While the chief gives orders, several armed bandits position themselves around, ready to act. Furious, Naoki explodes and questions what the hell is happening with Goldor. Grabbing Naoki by the arm, Alan interrupts him and explains coldly that they are the enemies. Then Alan narrows his reddened eyes and concludes that Goldor's true objective was always to kill him. Goldor smiles crookedly with disturbed eyes, finally revealing his true face without any disguise. Then Naoki questions why Goldor would be targeting Alan, while Alan responds coldly that he's simply in his way. Facing everything with reddened eyes, Alan confirms that Goldor is part of the pro-Demon King faction. Hina processes the revelation with an open face, unable to hide the shock of what she just heard. But the bandit chief laughs and taunts, saying that even discovered, Alan will die there anyway. Hearing this, 5 high-level bandits surround the group, displaying their levels with total arrogance. Then Hina steps back, remembering what Goldor said before, about having someone from the pro-Demon King faction nearby. Completing the reasoning, Alan reveals calmly that Goldor was talking about himself all along. Satisfied, Goldor confirms everything and rubs in Alan's face that, even knowing, he walked straight into the trap. But Alan already materializes something in his hand and faces Goldor head-on, not backing down a single step. Naoki and Hina step back, stunned, while the bandit chief breaks into cold sweat, realizing what Alan is doing. Without hurry, Alan raises a weapon and apologizes for interrupting Goldor's speech. Taking Alan's strike, Goldor falls backward, but lifts his head with a smile on his face. Rising to his feet and letting out a laugh, Goldor declares the conversation is over and charges at Alan. Naoki and Hina watch horrified, not understanding how Alan's strikes aren't working on Goldor. The ring on Goldor's hand reveals itself as the Ring of Absolute Barrier, capable of nullifying any strike from someone 50 levels below him. Laughing with wide yellow gold eyes, level 125 Goldor declares that no one there can even scratch him. But Alan grips the weapon calmly and advances toward Goldor, not hesitating a single second before the threat. Beside Hina, her companion shouts that there's no chance of victory for them, but Alan responds with a calm look, assuring them there's no problem at all. From a distance, Goldor hears the response and angrily questions the boy's confidence. Unfazed, Alan reveals he already knew about the protective barrier from the beginning. Then Goldor ignores his warning and orders his men to attack with everything they've got. Following the order, one of the leaders advances and tells his subordinates to move in. At that same instant, several enemies run together toward Alan, ready to attack. Keeping his composure, he just gives a slight smile as he waits for his opponents to approach. Then, a strange inventory screen appears, floating right in front of his body. Raising his hand, he manifests several dark orbs that begin to float around him. Soon after, these orbs transform into a swarm of drones that fill the air. Next, more drones keep appearing, forming a technological army right above everyone. Seeing this, the men who were advancing stop in shock, not understanding what's happening. With a quick hand gesture, Alan prepares to give the attack command, and then, the drones fire multiple strikes at once, bombarding all the enemies. Taking the attack, all the enemies are hit and immediately fall to the ground. One of the men writhes on the ground, putting his hands on his head in despair. Meanwhile, Goldor just watches the scene with an expression of pure fury on his face, but Alan simply stares back with his cold gaze, showing no emotion. Up above, the drones continue flying over all the battle smoke. As the smoke dissipates, the bodies of defeated enemies cover the entire ground. Noticing the massacre, one of the leaders panics and starts running to escape. Then Alan materializes a weapon and lands a precise hit on the running man. Struck dead on, his body falls lifeless to the ground alongside his companions. Right after, he faces the battle's result with a completely indifferent expression. Getting close, Goldor steps on the body of one of his men with contempt. At this, the group stares at Alan as he coldly questions the captain's attitude. But Goldor reveals the plan was to use them as bait so he could attack himself. Not caring, he grips the handle of his large combat weapon tightly, and then Goldor prepares to fight, raising his axe with a threatening air. With a sinister smile, Goldor announces that hunting season has finally begun. Activating his abilities, his arm muscles are visibly strengthened for the confrontation. Right after, he continues the process, releasing all his power at once. With his whole body energized, he faces his opponent with intensely glowing eyes. Seeing this, Hina and her companion are amazed at the amount of power being released, but Alan just observes the scene, analyzing the captain's strategy for combat. Then Goldor leaps into the air with the axe in hand, preparing a powerful attack. Turning upside down, he taunts his opponent to try and counter the strike. Lying on the ground, Alan just closes his eyes with an expression of total tranquility. At that instant, energy begins to emerge around his feet on the ground. Extending his hand forward, he activates his own ability, materializing something from nothing. With this, a massive cage forms around Goldor, trapping him in midair. Not understanding anything, Hina and the other look shocked at what just happened. Trapped in the snare, Goldor screams with rage, threatening to destroy the entire structure. And then he turns and strikes a blow with his axe against the bars. Seeing the damaged weapon, he's shocked by the resistance of those thin bars. Approaching the cage, Alan walks calmly toward the completely motionless enemy. Then he explains the cage is made of a material impossible to break. Hearing this, Goldor just grinds his teeth with an expression of pure fury. With an angry shout, he releases all his energy trying to force the structure, but in the process, his axe blade ends up breaking into several pieces. At that moment, a laser sight mysteriously appears pointed right at the captain's eye. From outside the cage, Alan admits he couldn't beat him in a direct fight. That's why he needed to find a way to win the fight without actually fighting. Realizing defeat, the captain is left without reaction, totally shocked by the situation. Already sitting on the ground, Goldor listens to Alan explain this was his only chance. With a determined look, he states his job is to make the impossible possible. Hearing the taunt, Goldor just stares at him with a look of complete contempt. But in the distance, Hina and her companion celebrate his incredible and unexpected victory. Then he warns there's no key and his fate is sealed forever. Recognizing defeat, Goldor stares at his opponent with a look of pure frustration. Then he grabs the cage bars, completely changing his previous strategy. Desperate, he begins to beg Alan to remove the cage, admitting his mistake. With panic on his face, he shouts that he regrets everything that happened there. But Hina and her friend look at the scene with an expression of total distrust. Still insisting, he swears to everyone he's not lying about his regret, but his look changes to a smile of hatred, revealing his true evil intentions. Noticing the farce, they warn Alan not to fall for the prisoner's talk. Ignoring the pleas, Alan turns around and warns he's going to leave him there to die. As the group walks away, he shouts that he's willing to do anything. Hearing the proposal, he stops walking and looks back with interest. With a relieved expression, the captain confirms he'll do everything he commands. Then Alan materializes a recorder and demands information about a demon faction. Showing the device, he reveals the object records anyone's voice. Staring at the recorder, Goldor grinds his teeth at being tricked again. With his back to the cell, Alan prepares to hear the prisoner's entire confession, but Goldor gives a smile, thinking he'll eliminate everyone as soon as he gets out of there. Grabbing the bars, he says he'll tell everything, but asks to undo the cage first. With a serious look, Alan refuses the offer and imposes his own conditions for freeing him. Hearing the response, the captain just stares at him with a look of pure frustration. Then he kneels on the ground and accepts the deal, asking for a promise of freedom. With a slight smile on his face, the boy simply responds that he'll keep his word. Seeing the scene, Hina and her companion shout that the promise is too dangerous. However, Alan calms them down and asks the two to keep watch of the surroundings. Pointing to the drones on the ground, he tells them both to recharge the machines with energy. Turning their backs, the group prepares to follow orders while he continues the interrogation. His feet plant firmly on the ground, showing he won't back down from his decision. With the recorder in hand, he prepares to start recording everything. Staring at the object, Goldor prepares to tell everything about the Demon King's faction. Kneeling in the cell, Goldor denies being part of the feared Demon King's faction. Not understanding the excuse, Alan questions the true meaning of that strange revelation. Then he explains that he only followed direct orders to try and take his life. At that, Goldor reveals that the mastermind behind the entire plan was Olivia. Hearing the name, Alan's eyes gleam with a silent, contained fury. Back there, his friends are shocked because Olivia asked him to protect the city. But Alan reveals it was all a trap, since only she could give the orders. Surprised by the deduction, Goldor understands he had already discovered the entire plan. Then Alan asks him to explain the real reason Olivia wanted him dead. With that, the captain reveals she was embezzling all the defense money. Explaining the situation, he says the government sent a fortune to the army, and that money should have been used to strengthen the guards against the great enemy. With his hands on his head, he reveals she was already planning to flee with the cash. But Alan accuses him of also taking advantage of all this massive corruption. With a cold gaze, he concludes that the king's defeat would end the money flow. Still in the cage, Goldor says there's proof and witnesses of everything he said. Then he materializes a book, stating that it's the record of all the fraud. Confused by the revelation, Hina listens as Alan explains the city's tax situation. Remembering the past, the citizens appear furious, shouting at the local defense clans, because in truth, Olivia was the real culprit behind the entire crisis between them. Back to the present, Alan demands that Goldor hand over the book with all the evidence, but the captain refuses, revealing his intention to attack as soon as he's released. With a slight smile, Alan simply confirms the promise he made to him before. Refusing the trade, he gives up on the book and simply turns to leave. Seeing him leave, Goldor panics and shouts without understanding what's happening. Then he explains that a traitor doesn't deserve to be treated with any honesty. Next, the group continues moving away, leaving the prisoner behind in the cage. With an enraged face, he shouts that Alan never intended to free him from the start. As they walk away, he keeps shouting his name with all his strength. Now far from there, he explains that the guard's confession was already sufficient proof. Breaking the clan's rules, Alan decides that from there they need to split up. With that, Hina and their friend agree with the plan, but ask him to be careful. With a serious look, he guarantees she'll pay for everything she did. Shifting to the castle, a guard reports the latest events to his immediate superior. He informs that the entire royal guard was detained under suspicion of a major crime, and then the guard points to Lady Olivia as the main culprit of the situation. Already in another place, Alan finds Olivia kneeling in the great throne room. Holding the recorder, he asks coldly if she has anything to say in her defense. Without waiting for an answer, he advances and places the weapon directly in the woman's mouth. While she's on the ground, he He comments how difficult it is to speak in that uncomfortable position. With her hands bound, she desperately begs him to spare her life. Soon after, she humiliates herself and offers to lick his boots right there, but he fires a shot upward and demands to know how she found out everything. Still on the ground, she explains she heard the news from a guild executive. Then he aims the weapon again, preparing to deliver his final blow. With a panicked face, she begs him while hearing his last demand. He then questions about others who don't want the Great Demon King's defeat. Hearing the question, she becomes completely terrified, not knowing what to say to him. Trying to explain herself, she swears she knows nothing about the others involved. Then she reveals there is no faction, just people acting on their own. Processing the information, he understands the so-called faction is just a concept. Next, she warns that his targets aren't just these types of people. Aiming the weapon, he demands she explain the real meaning of that new threat. But he becomes visibly confused by the response, not understanding the logic of the argument. Then she says many might try to kill him out of pure fear of his power. Dismissing the warning, he shoots the ground right beside her body. With that, she explains that the mere existence of the weapons is already a major threat, and also that they're very easy to mass produce and distribute around. Therefore, his enemies are everyone who considers him dangerous to their world. Hearing the revelation, he falls silent, processing the complexity of the new situation. Reflecting on the situation, he realizes his guardian title no longer frightens anyone, but she guarantees in terror that the royal government has already been informed of the entire situation. Still aiming the weapon, he stares down at her, unmoved by the response. Going back in time, one of his companions was hit by several blows suddenly. Beside him, another soldier watches the scene completely terrified by the surprise attack. With that, she promises her total trust, stating he is her benefactor. Hearing the declaration, he stares at her surprised, processing the sudden change in attitude. Still with the weapon in her mouth, she swears she has no ambition to betray him now. Then he lifts her from the ground, ready to take her to the Sacred Guardian's headquarters. Already in another place, he finishes telling everything that happened during the confrontation. There in the throne room, he continued pressuring the woman with the weapon in her mouth. Without hesitation, he pulls the trigger and lands a blow right in front of her. With the shock, her eye widens in pure panic and complete despair. Soon after, her body drops hard to the floor, falling without any strength. Fallen on the ground, she curls up terrified, revealing her total lack of control. With a serious face, he takes the blame for not having a plan for this. Walking through the hall, he discusses the people who consider him a major threat. Then he explains that Olivia's failure will make the enemies much more cautious. Hearing the explanation, the guard says he trusts his word on the situation. With a slight smile, he accepts his superior's trust without saying anything. Soon after, the two say goodbye and go their ways in totally opposite directions. Back at headquarters, he finishes reporting everything that happened to his superior. In his office, Alan apologizes for not being prepared for what happened. Then the superior asks his opinion about what Olivia said about the threat, but he states that her failure will make the other enemies much smarter. Soon after, he says he has a very important matter to discuss with Alan. With a serious look, he decides that Alan needs to leave Naoki's group. Not understanding, he questions the decision, remembering the clan's 3-person rule. Then he explains that because of this, he needs to ask him to end his activities there. Not understanding the decision, Alan asks if he's being kicked out of the entire clan, but his superior explains that the clan's rules don't allow missions for solo members. Sensing there's more to it, he questions what the real condition behind this agreement is. Then the man reveals that the decision was made to protect his future companions. Wanting more details, he simply asks his superior to explain the whole situation better. At that point, he's reminded that everyone by his side will live under constant threat from enemies. By keeping others away from danger, he finally understands the logic behind the decision. But his superior says that, in a way, it's Alan's own fault. Showing the weapons, he explains that sharing the technology would take the target off his back. Agreeing with the argument, he admits the man's logic is completely correct. Then he gives him clearance to act alone, using the clan's name as protection. Accepting the favor, Alan asks if he won't get anything in return for this, but with a smile, he guarantees the clan is gaining a lot from this. After hearing the response, Alan just silently processes the new information he's received. Wrapping up the conversation, he warns that the scandal will spread throughout the entire kingdom. When the news spreads, he and his clan will be even more in the spotlight. Understanding the play, he realizes this will bring great prestige to the clan, but his superior reveals that, above all else, he likes having his name honored. Then he proposes a mutually beneficial relationship to maintain this partnership from now on. Extending his hand to seal the deal, he awaits the young man's final answer. With a sly smile, Alan shows he agrees with all the terms of the proposal. Shaking hands firmly, the two finally seal the new and powerful alliance between them. Shifting to the capital, some people gather in a large enclosed training field. At that moment, a man apologizes for calling everyone there so suddenly. Right after, two new characters are introduced to participate in that important power demonstration. With an eager look, the man says he could hardly wait to see the prototype. Then, the other guy materializes an object that appears floating with an intense glow. Moments later, the light reveals an assault rifle with great power. Taking the weapon in his hands, he praises the work of the greatest craftsman in the entire kingdom. While he aims, the woman comments that the weapon's appearance was her work. With a smile, the craftsman says the weapon's true value is in its use. Then he encourages the man to shoot to understand what he's talking about. Positioned, the man prepares to test the weapon on the wooden training targets. Beside him, the two creators watch the test with great anticipation for the final result. With his finger on the trigger, he prepares to fire with full power. With several shots, the target is completely destroyed by a rain of projectiles. Impressed with the result, he praises the incredible and fantastic rate of fire. In the end, all that's left of the target is a piece of wood riddled with holes. Inside the weapon, several magic stones were used to reproduce the firepower. After the test, the man asks if they can copy Alan's weapon. With an embarrassed look, the craftsman doesn't know how to answer that question. But the woman reveals that analyzing the weapon is very difficult and complicated. So the only solution is to get the weapon's blueprint directly from Alan. With this, they plan to use the new weapon as bait to attract attention. Processing the idea, she realizes this can be used as a great advantage. But the craftsman questions how they're going to get in contact with the guy. With a smile, the man guarantees that this time they can predict his movements, because Alan is obsessed with leveling up and is currently at level 30. Hearing this, the two realize he's going to take the beginner exam. Then, the man reveals he's already made all the arrangements for the future meeting. Taking advantage of the moment, he prepares to introduce a new ally for the mission. At that point, a girl descends the stairs, walking toward the entire gathered group. Seeing the scene, the two craftsmen observe her with an expression of total surprise. With an air of superiority, the girl introduces herself to everyone as Rena. Next, she reveals that she's the daughter of the great and powerful Zane. With a smile, the craftsman compliments the beauty of his direct superior's daughter. Then the man explains that she's also at level 30 for the exam. But the craftswoman questions if he's really going to use his own daughter as bait. With disdain, Rena says she has no objections and insults the girl present there. With a gesture, she states that a plan like this is child's play. Explaining the plan, the man says the best bait is a craftswoman of the same level. At that point, the girl presents herself as the perfect craftswoman for everyone's mission. Picking up the weapon, she continues to snub the other craftswoman with her air of superiority. Then her father explains that Alan will think she herself built that weapon. Beside them, he even suggests that Alan might be enchanted by her beauty. Right after, he praises his own brilliant mind behind that entire great strategy, also counting on the craftsman's creation ability for the plan's success. And finally, she adds her own beauty and wisdom as part of the trap. Combining all of this, they believe the plan to deceive Alan is completely foolproof. But the other craftswoman realizes she was completely forgotten in the middle of that grand plan. In the capital, a crowd gathered in the large waiting area for the beginner's exam. There in the middle, Alan said goodbye to his old teammates with gratitude. Teasing him, Hina invites him on a date if he ends up failing. Then, the two say goodbye, wishing each other good luck, but she reinforces the date promise. With his departure confirmed, he simply closes his eyes and focuses on his goal. Walking around, a girl approaches him while watching him with great curiosity. Noticing her presence, he turns and immediately recognizes her familiar face. Smiling at him, the girl named Emma greets him for being together again. Then he asks if she's also there for the same beginner's exam. At that, she remembers that before, the level difference between them was small. Noticing his advancement, she asks how he evolved so fast in this world. With a smile on her face, she just asks if he's curious about the answer. Right after, she reveals it was thanks to the weapons he himself gave her. Explaining her strategy, she says she repeated the same mission several times without stopping. Believing it to be fate, she proposes they both pass the final exam together. With a slight smile, Alan agrees with his old companion's proposal. Up ahead, a man adjusts his clothes and prepares for the announcement. Calling everyone's attention, he positions himself before the crowd of anxious candidates. Then he announces that the exam for all beginners will finally begin now. Explaining the rules, he informs them the test will be a battle between teams. The participants will be taken to a special arena where the battle will take place. The combat will continue until only a single group of up to 4 people remains. In this arena, a magical barrier will generate health bars for all participants, and whoever has their bar zeroed will be eliminated and removed from the test site. In the end, only the 30 best groups will manage to pass the great exam. Hearing the rules, he realizes the battle is quite similar to a game. In that game, the beginner's exam served as a tutorial for combat. Excited about the rules, she realizes she can shoot without worrying about anything, but he reminds her that her weapon already has a built-in safety lock. Then he says he'll create something to attack the others before the teleportation. Giving 10 minutes, he tells everyone to form their teams for the great challenge. With a shout, he orders all preparations to begin immediately for the exam. At the same instant, the crowd stirs, with everyone searching for new companions. Meanwhile, a group of guild executives watched all the movement from afar. One of them then questions if any of the candidates has the power to defeat the king, but the other laments that the adventurers from his jurisdiction are too weak for that. Likewise, the other executive says her small nation has few candidates there. Then the man praises the nation of Zand for having so many strong candidates in the exam. With a smirk, he agrees with his guild colleague's assessment, and he even states there are some promising rookies participating in that great event. Amid the confusion, she suggests they recruit 2 more people for the team, but Alan refuses the idea, stating that a weak ally is worse than an enemy. With a smile, she questions if he's simply going to ignore all the other candidates. Suddenly, a girl approaches and asks if he's the craftsman Alan. Then Rena introduces herself as a craftswoman, just like him, to get his attention. Hearing the introduction, he comments that her choice of class is quite strange. Not understanding, he asks what she wants while the girl manifests a glow. Right after, she reveals a rifle and accuses him of copying her creation. Seeing the weapon, he's surprised by what's before him. Analyzing the object, he notices it's an assault rifle with very familiar stats. At that, he wonders what kind of trick this is with such similar attributes. Then Rena claims to be the true inventor of the weapons, leaving Emma totally surprised. With a side smile, he accuses the girl of being the real copycat. Ignoring the accusation, she shouts angrily, demanding he compare the blueprints. Right after, she demands Alan show the original design of his own weapon, but he refuses the request, stating she'll simply copy the entire design. Proposing a challenge, she suggests a bet worth both their designs in the exam. Provoking the guy, she asks if he's afraid to accept the challenge. Even finding the provocation cheap, he decides he'll accept the girl's challenge. Making the rules clear, the loser will hand over the designs to the great winner. Adding a new rule, the loser will also have to reproduce the winner's weapon. Analyzing the situation, he wants to see the design to discover the truth about the weapon. At that moment, Emma approaches the two and interrupts the conversation with a question. With a smile, she questions what will happen if neither of them wins, but the two answer together that this possibility is simply impossible to happen. Suddenly, the guild executive warns that the time for everyone has finally run out. Next, he sends all the adventurers to the great teleportation circle. Walking away with her group, she says goodbye and wishes good luck in the challenge. Without answering anything, he just watches her with a serious and very determined look. Then the executive raises his fist and shouts that the exam is officially starting. At the same instant, beams of light rise from the circle, transporting all the participants. Seen from afar, the beams fall all over the exam's battlefield. Right after, Alan and Emma appear together in the middle of a very dense forest. Looking up, he sees the health bar and comments about an old game. Ignoring her question, he begins to create something with his own hands. With weapons in hand, the two advance together and begin the hunt in the forest. Meanwhile, Rena's group arrives safely at a rocky location in the arena. At that, she activates her creation ability, manifesting an energy around her. Then an entire house appears, materialized out of nowhere, right in front of the girl. With her base ready, she warns she'll wait and leaves the rest to them. Obeying the order, her 3 level 30 companions stand still waiting for the next step. At the same instant, a strange energy undoes the disguise that covered the entire group. Right after, it's revealed they're all level 200 rogues, much stronger. Seeing the plan work, she announces her hunting season has finally begun. Arriving at the beach, Emma admires the beauty of the ocean right in front of her, but Alan reminds her that they're still in the middle of a very important exam. With a serious tone, he warns her not to enter the water carelessly. Not understanding the danger, She asks how she could be eliminated just by going in there. Then he points to a barrier that eliminates anyone who touches it in one go. Illustrating the situation, the drawing shows a dummy being eliminated upon touching the barrier. But he explains that this location gives them the greatest advantage to win the exam. With his hand extended, he begins to materialize a cube with a glowing energy. In the same instant, the cube expands and transforms into several metallic objects. Seeing that, she's astonished, not knowing what those weapons are. Explaining the creation, he reveals that those weapons are long-range mortars. Being at the center, they can attack enemies in all directions of the island. With the projectile falling, the weapon fires automatically when it reaches the bottom of the barrel. With an embarrassed smile, she still doesn't understand how they're going to use all of that. Then he snaps his fingers, assuring her she can leave everything to him. With a snap of his fingers, he releases the locks on all the mortars at once. The weight of the projectile triggers the mechanism, firing the weapon with an intense glow. Then, the projectile is launched upward with incredible speed through the weapon's barrel. After the first shot, the other mortars begin to reload and fire on their own. Soon after, all the mortars fire together, launching several projectiles into the sky. Next, the projectiles fly toward their target, ready for the big impact. In the sky, the projectiles all explode together, creating a massive rain of fire. Watching the scene, Emma is surprised by the explosion of the projectiles still in the air. Elsewhere, several teams were fighting each other with their swords and bows. Suddenly, shrapnel from the projectiles falls from the sky, catching everyone by surprise. Hit by the attack, all the adventurers are caught in the middle of the rain of fire. With that, several participants are eliminated, and he analyzes the result on a screen. Impressed, Emma praises the incredible battle strategy he just used, but he reveals that was just his backup plan, less efficient than the original. Then the two prepare to eliminate the enemies who survived the massive attack. Back at the waiting area, the eliminated adventurers emerge from the teleportation circle. Not understanding anything, they comment that they were eliminated before they could even react to the attack. From afar, the guild executives observe the massacre through a large orb. Impressed, they praise the battle tactics of that young and promising participant. Then a female executive asks if the one responsible for that was really just a common artisan. With an air of pride, the man confirms that he's the artisan Alan, and he further reveals that he's one of the most promising newcomers in the entire clan. But the other executives doubt that an artisan is capable of doing all that. With confidence, the female executive says the winner of the exam is already decided. However, the man says that plot twists can happen at any moment in battle. With a hateful look, he hopes that Rena and her group will win. Back in the arena, Rena was waiting calmly in her home, far from all the action. Sipping a cup of tea, she reflects on the abilities of her personal inventory, because she could do other things while storing the freshly prepared tea for later. Analyzing the records, she understands why her father is keeping an eye on the artisan. With a smile, she says his strategy only works against weak opponents, because her father's rogues are completely immune to low-level attacks. The disguise ability allows them to adjust the level that's publicly displayed, so they can hide among the others and attack by surprise in the arena. Moreover, they can use the abilities of the classes they're imitating at the moment. With a confident look, she reveals her true and powerful trump card. Her servants are a group of level 170 warriors ready for battle. They easily withstand the bombardment, which doesn't cause any damage to their bodies. With that, she takes a sip of tea, certain that her victory is absolute. While pouring a cup of tea, she laughs, mocking her opponent's strategy. Then she throws her head back and lets out a long, loud laugh. Far from there, a drone was flying over the forest, observing all the movement in the arena. Its camera moved, recording and transmitting everything it saw along the way. Elsewhere, Alan and Emma were resting, analyzing the next steps of the battle. Noticing his concern, she asks what's wrong with his plan. With his back to her, Alan asks about the apple she was eating. Smiling, she asks if he finally noticed the detail of the fruit in her hand. With pride, she shows the apple and says she produced it herself right there. Unimpressed, he just asks if she became a farmer by any chance, but she reveals that she learned to use a new type of plant magic. Ignoring the explanation, Alan just comments that the fruit seems to be a common apple. Then she says she chose an unpopular magic on purpose to follow in his footsteps. While she speaks, he gets distracted looking at something on his device and ignores her. Confused by the reaction, she asks if something went wrong over there. With a serious look, he reveals that a high-level group is hiding. Shocked, she says that's impossible since everyone should be at the same level, but he explains that the disguise ability makes that totally possible for them. In an old game, the exam was against NPCs, and nobody cared about that. Then she says his weapons should be able to defeat the enemy. But he explains that the exam's format makes their defense very strong. Realizing the disadvantage, she asks if they're destined to lose the battle. With a determined look, he prepares to face the new and unexpected challenge. Meanwhile, two adventurers were running through the forest and came across Rina's group up ahead. With a battle cry, they charged together and attacked the standing group with everything they had. After the attack, one of them celebrated with his friend, thinking victory was certain. Suddenly, they noticed something strange and looked back with an expression of shock. The enemy group was standing there without a scratch, their health intact. At that moment, one of them realized the Guardian's ability had redirected all the damage. With a smile, the enemy advanced and prepared for a counterattack against the two. Then, one of the group members launched a powerful fire strike against the adventurers. With a sigh, he mocked the lack of power and naivety of his opponents. Using his ability, he located Alan and Emma at the center of the island to attack. Analyzing the situation, he realized almost all the other groups had been eliminated. With an evil smile, he celebrated the easy work of cleaning up the survivors. Watching the scene, the executives were outraged by the cowardice of the high-level rogues. Furious, the female executive demanded the group be disqualified for cheating on the exam, but the man explained he couldn't disqualify them, since there were no rules against it. But the executive feared this would corrupt the exam's purpose in the future, so the man suggested they simply ban the tactic starting from the next exam. Despite not affecting the ranking, the tactic remained a point of discord. Without much choice, the female executive agreed with the decision, even against everyone's wishes. With a victorious smile, the man celebrated the success of his infiltration plan. Back at the beach, Alan explained the key was defeating the group's guardian. Drawing in the sand, he showed how damage was transferred to the team's guardian. And besides that, his divine protection could still reduce incoming damage significantly. Even if the guardian got hit, the group's priest could heal him quickly. Desperate, she asked what they could do if they couldn't separate the guardian. He then explained the only way was with an indirect and well-planned attack. With an apple in hand, she understood the strategy was to prevent healing. With a focused look, he remembered an important detail for the plan. Then he asked about the plant magic she had learned to use before. With a smile, he revealed he had a great idea to win the battle. Walking through the forest, Rina's group was surprised by a sudden call. Right after, Alan suddenly appeared and attacked the three with one strike. Looking to the side, the enemy group was shocked by what they saw. Suddenly, a huge explosion hit the location, raising a cloud of dust. Through the smoke, they realized it was one of those famous crafted weapons. But despite the impact, the damage to the Guardian's health was very small. Not understanding where the attack came from, they realized the enemy had already fled. While the priest healed the Guardian, he complained about the hit-and-run tactic. With a smile, Alan appeared and revealed they weren't trying to run away. Suddenly, several seeds fell from the sky and sprouted on the ground instantly. Then, the Guardian was trapped by vines that emerged from the ground and immobilized him. Coming out of hiding, Alan revealed it was just common barbed wire. Beside him, Emma explained the vines were the result of her magic. With each movement, the iron thorns cut through the body and caused damage. Casting her magic, Emma accelerated the vine's growth to increase the damage. Trapped in the snare, the Guardian noticed his health dropping rapidly and despaired. But with a calm look, he realized the situation wasn't so bad after all, because the priest healed him, explaining that the tactic of trapping him was useless. Seeing the plan fail, Alan warned Emma for them to flee immediately. With his body in flames, the enemy advanced and said they wouldn't escape. Stopping his run, he revealed the escape was part of a new strategy. With a smile, Alan warned the enemy to be more careful with his steps. Suddenly, the ground began to shake and crack beneath their feet. Without time to react, the ground collapsed and the entire group fell into the hole. Right after, the rest of the ground gave way, and everyone fell into the trap's darkness. Surprised, one of the enemies questioned how they dug a hole so fast there. From above the hole, she revealed that was the power of plant magic, because the plant roots had spread out and left the ground completely fragile. At the bottom of the hole, the Guardian was shocked by the magic's power, but Alan revealed he buried explosives in the soil along with the barbed wire. With a hateful look, the Guardian said he was counting on burning the vines. From above the hole, the two prepared for the next stage of the plan. With a serious tone, Alan warned that was the enemy's last chance. Hearing the warning, the Guardian just stared at him with a look of pure contempt. Then, they started shooting at the group, aiming mainly at the team's Guardian. Hit squarely, he screamed in pain as his health decreased with the blows. With the enemy almost defeated, Alan believed the battle had finally ended for them. But suddenly, the damage stopped being counted, and his health froze. Looking into the hole, they saw the situation had changed unexpectedly because the mage had redirected all the damage from his allies to himself. At the same instant, he switched his equipment and became the new guardian. Shocked, Emma realized both groups had the same strategy idea. With the new formation, they ensured the shared damage wouldn't be a problem. Surprised, Alan just lamented the cruelty of the strategy used by the enemy group. Ignoring the priestess, the armored knight used a potion to heal himself alone. Then, a hooded figure revealed his disguise with a quite sinister smile. Then, a second accomplice with a helmet on his head also showed himself determined. Together again, the three enemies seemed to simply return to the start of combat. From afar, Alan and his companion observed the situation unfolding ahead. In front of them, the masked leader said it was impossible to win because of the system. But hearing that, Alan simply gave a little smirk. Seeing his reaction, the masked one asked what he was laughing so much about. Responding to the enemy, Alan said he had forgotten how the system worked there. Understanding nothing, the hooded figure was confused by that unexpected answer. His partner also questioned what he was trying to say with all that. Calmly, Alan just said he would show and materialized a crystal in his hand. Holding the crystal, he revealed the strategic mind that put him at the top. Recognizing the item, the masked man identifies the crystal dragon's magic stone. Right after, his partner asks what Alan plans to do with that thing there. Challenging the boy, the hooded man tells him to try if he thinks he can. Accepting the challenge, Alan prepares himself as energy begins to swirl around him. In the same instant, an energy cage materializes, trapping the three enemies. Trying to escape, the hooded man touches the wall and tries to use an attack, but his magic doesn't break through, leaving him and his partner quite surprised. With a calm look, Alan explains that their attacks won't get through. Then they retort, saying that Alan also can't hit them with his attacks. Seeing the situation, his companion suggests they hide while they can, but Alan looks at her and says they don't need to run or hide. Turning forward, he says, "Now things get fun and it begins." Using his ability, dice begin to form the structure of a large vehicle. Little by little, the side of the object assembles itself in front of everyone. In the end, Alan materializes a modern-looking car right there on the ground. Seeing the car, the masked leader is completely shocked by the unexpected situation. Not understanding anything, Alan's companion asks what that thing is. Then he explains it's a car and asks her to sit there. Getting into the vehicle, she settles into the seat and asks for his confirmation. Right after, he hands her the magic stone and tells her to put it in the slot. Looking for the place, she finds the space and inserts the crystal into the panel. With a click, the stone fits perfectly into the car's compartment. From outside, he warns that he's going to start the vehicle's engine. Then he gives her instructions, asking her to step on a specific pedal. Trapped in the cage, the enemies watch without understanding what's happening. Looking at them, Alan tells them to enjoy their confidence while they still can. Then he materializes a chain that connects to the back of the car. Attaching to the cage, the chain fixes itself to the base of their structure. Giving the final order, he tells her to step hard on the right pedal. With a determined face, she agrees and prepares to accelerate the car. Following the order, she steps hard on the pedal with all her strength. With that, the car lurches forward abruptly, throwing debris everywhere. In the same instant, the chain stretches completely and becomes fully taut. Pulling the cage, the jolt throws the three enemies against each other. At high speed, the car drags the cage with the three inside across the ground. Being dragged, they're thrown from side to side non-stop. In panic, his companion screams, asking how to stop the car now. But Alan remains calm and says now is the time to finish. Meanwhile, she realizes they're heading straight for a large cliff. At the edge, a ramp made of energy was materialized for the car to pass. Then the vehicle jumps off the ramp and flies through the air with the cage. Seeing she's falling, his companion screams desperately sitting in the seat. Behind them, the enemies also scream terrified as they plummet into the abyss. Alan then materializes a sharp object in his hand to finalize the plan. Using the object, he cuts the chain and releases the cage into the abyss. Exiting the area, the three enemies are eliminated instantly by the test system. Going back in time, one of them was trying to talk calmly with Alan's companion. Back to the present, Alan says the plan to eliminate the group worked. He explains it was impossible to defeat them inside the area because of the rules, so the only solution was simply to force everyone outside the combat zone. His only doubt was whether the magic stone would have power for the whole plan, but being an epic stone, it had more than enough energy to work. Now he turns around and walks to finish the last remaining enemy. Changing scenery, a house is seen alone in a rocky desert area. There, a blonde woman is calmly drinking a beverage using a straw. Lying in a chair, she sighs and seems completely bored with the current situation. In the distance, she's observed through the sight of binoculars with great attention. Aiming with a heavy weapon, Alan prepares to shoot at the woman. Without hesitating a second, he fires a projectile toward her house. The shot hits the umbrella, causing an explosion right next to the chair. Surprised by the noise, the blonde woman quickly removes her sunglasses. Looking at the sky, she sees a second projectile coming in her direction. Then a huge explosion of sand and debris throws her far away. Taking the impact, her health bar begins to decrease very quickly. With victory confirmed, Alan simply accepts the final result of that test. Changing scenes, the woman apologizes on her knees to an older man. While covering her, the man discusses with other people about her group. Back at the arena, Alan slowly descends inside a large sphere of light. Walking forward, he exits the light as people shout his name. Then his companion runs to him to complain about what happened. Making gestures, she complains that he made her drive without any explanation. But with a smile, Alan thanks her because she eliminated the cheaters all at once. Hearing the praise, she celebrates proudly while he watches her without reaction. Right after, he extends his hand and collects on the deal they made before. With no way out, the man and woman stand still with an annoyed expression. With an irritated face, the blonde woman hands the papers to him and complains. Taking the document, Alan begins to analyze the content with his companion watching from behind. On the paper, he sees the design of a modern weapon with magic stones. But looking more closely, he notices a crucial detail in the diagram. Holding the project, he's shocked to understand what that really was.